welcome back to another episode of the Black Ibis Social Club. And it's going to be a good one this time. Fisto's here like usual. What's up, Fisto?
Hey man,
And
how you
today's
doing?
guest, man, I'm doing great like usual. Actually, I'm doing good this week. I mean, okay, I told you my life was a dumpster fire and everything, and I
Yeah.
listed all that stuff, right? Well, the next day, my wife hit a deer and totaled our car. So, I mean, she's
Oof.
okay, the daughter's okay, but my car,
Most important. Good.
not so much. I actually just got the insurance, the quote from the garage that took our car, and it's going to be a $10,000 repair job, which is cool.
Outstanding.
Oof.
Not being a bum, I have insurance, so it's covered. I think I have like a $500 deductible, but I'm not going to have a
Just
car for a while. I have a rental. I have a Buick.
just be glad that didn't happen north of the 49 because like in the
Right.
moose country, like you hit a moose and the moose is like mildly annoyed. It like walks away with a limp. You're just dead. Like, like
Yeah, that deer she hit. Luckily it was one of those days where I was ended up working a late night that night, so I didn't go into work until about noon, and I was eating breakfast, and she was driving my daughter to school, and this thing just jumped out of nowhere. I was like in broad daylight, busy street, and totaled the car. And it's not a small car either. She drives a Toyota RAV4, like one of the new ones, the big ones. And yeah, it did not do well. The deer was so big that the cop tried to move it, and he's like, I can't even do it, man. I gotta call somebody to drag this thing off the road because it was huge. Anyways, before we go, today's guest joining us at the Black Ibis Club over here is no other than our own John Carter. All right, one of the most famous and esteemed writers on Substack and X and all over the place. So I've been meaning to have John on for a long time. We've been friends for like a year now, talking back and forth. Welcome finally to the show, John.
Yeah, welcome, John.
man, thank you so much for inviting me on. I'm really happy to be here.
So, I mean, I'm gonna apologize to our guests. People that know John know that he is a world traveling dilettante, flaneur of all sorts of roads and byways and waterways. So he's traveling, so his connection might cut out a little bit. But you know what? We'll try to fix that in post editing because we have a crack editing team at the Black Ibis Social Club of me, and we'll do our
Emphasis on
best.
crack. Emphasis on crack.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm highly caffeinated today, man. Just so you know. But hey,
Uh-oh.
John, before we start, like our first topic of conversation, which ties into one of your recent articles, and I wrestled with this all day. Okay, like I'm like, man, how do I want to talk about this? Do I even want to talk about this? I'm already bored about this, to be honest. I'm like bored of the topic, but we have to talk about Minnesota Shiloh, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Shout out
So
Hendrix.
everybody that is listening is probably familiar with Minnesota Shiloh. You might be listening to this many years from recording, right? But so I'm going to give a quick rundown. A woman of a Caucasian variety, a blonde woman. She had a bit of a pagan bent to her based on her tattoos on her forearm. She,
Uh-huh.
I think so. Am I right? Does she have like a?
Yeah, so I saw people on X saying she had like uh, a Mjolnir tattoo on her forearm. But
Mhm.
like I don't know, man. Like I was like squinting at like the stills and like I couldn't make it out. So like I don't know, maybe
Maybe
like
I looked at it too. I
yeah.
didn't see it, but it's irrelevant, right? So for the story purposes, she was in some park in Minnesota, and I know nothing about Minnesota or parks, right? And with her infant, looked like she had like a little infant, and some child,
18 months old apparently. So
right?
so I was just talking about this exact thing with the Astral Codex 10 podcast like 2 days ago. Um,
Right.
and he mentioned that like, this kid's 18 months old. So I was actually shocked. That kid's a beast at that age. So like I mean, you just imagine the dad must be like just an absolute mountain troll of a man.
Right, these Minnesota Viking dudes.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, so she catches a little child, a child, right? Uh, basically robbing her, her diaper bag or something that she had on the ground or whatever, like you want to do at a park.
I think he was like
And
stealing food from the bag or something. Like I heard something like yogurt or
right,
something like that. Like,
but we don't
yeah,
see
which
this. We don't we
like
don't see this at
stealing
all.
food from like like stealing the baby's food from the mom's bag. Like that's like any mom is gonna like that's like a special level of like primal, rage that you're going to
Right,
elicit by doing that. Yeah.
right. And
Yes.
baby stuff, as a parent myself, is very expensive, okay? Like
Mm.
diapers and food, and and then it's like, wait a second, you're already stressed out, you know. If you ever had a kid, and even going to the park with a kid is a giant pain in the ass. It's a high stressful situation where you're always aware. There's no, parks are supposed to be relaxing, right? You're not supposed to be worried about people, rifling through your shit and stealing it. Anyways, well, we know about this because some dude decides to video like taper on, well, not video taper. I'm so freaking millennial. Um, to
Videotape. Yes,
get
he
a
got out his
video of her on his
VCR
phone
camera.
getting in her face, and he's
You get the
accusing her.
can had the camcorder.
Yes, the camcorder.
Yeah.
I couldn't even think of the word. Good Lord.
Right. He's accusing her of dropping the word of power, right? And the word of power we obviously can't say on a podcast because our lives would be ruined if we even mentioned it, right? Because that's really what the conversation's about. And she basically tells him to fuck
Mhm.
off, drops the word of power again, and flips him off and takes off. And then yeah,
multiple times. So she like sings it at him and smirks. It rolls her eyes and it's like saunters away. It was
right.
glorious, and like she didn't cringe, she didn't apologize, like she didn't deny that she'd said it. She just threw it in his face
Straight
as
to the
he was like,
face. Straight to the
Right.
face. Here you
yeah,
But
go.
that's
exactly.
not that's not where the interesting story is, right? The interesting
No,
story is
no,
that
not at
after the
all.
fact, this mutant that was filming her decides to upload it on the internet and try to shame her and stuff. And it backfires, right? She opens a GoFundMe and she gets a tremendous amount of support, right? And she makes tons and tons of money. So I think last time I checked, it was over $500,000. And
Hold on. It's way more than that now. I'm just looking it up. I've been like refreshing this a few times a day.
Looks like
She
well
is
over
now at
700,000.
$742,206.
Three
right.
quarters of a million.
Now,
Yep.
so this is where I kind
Mm.
of want to come in, and first of all, I'm gonna say that like there's your article on it was fantastic, right? So
Thank
if
you.
you're inclined to hop on to Substack and read John Carter's article on the word of power, um, and there's been like tons of articles, right? And what's interesting about the situation is, for one, this is the first time in my entire life that of living in the United States that I've seen this kind of a reaction to a cancellation, right? There's a level of
Hmm.
like anger, um, and like a complete crack in a post-war neoliberal kind of belief system that we're seeing, and it's pretty insane, right? Um, for right off the bat, I need to say, for the record, that all I saw, whether you believe it's crass, rude, obscene or not, right? All I saw was a mom defending her kid from a thief, right, which was off screen and we didn't see, but B, some creepy Somalian guy with a criminal record for pedophilia and rape getting in her face. That's all I saw.
Hmm.
All right, that's all the video
Actually,
showed.
technically, and this is actually even more sordid. He doesn't have a criminal record
Right, he doesn't have
technically
one.
because the charges were dropped, quote unquote, in the interests of justice. And
Right,
when if you actually read like the court statements and like the victim statements and stuff, which I have, uh, I mean it's pretty much an open and shut case. Like this guy and his friend just been molested this 16-year-old runaway girl. Um, I had strong sort of like Rotherham vibes from the way they were treating her, actually.
oh right,
And yeah, and then of course the DA in Minnesota is the Soros DA. He was he there's a picture of him floating around holding like an Antifa book, so he's like one of those.
right,
So like basically it was like, oh, the Somalis gonna get mad if we charge this guy. So we're just going to quietly drop the charges. Like they sat on it for like 3 years, like to move the court case forward, and just kind of like quietly, it's like like yeah, you're forgiven,
Right.
whatever. Yeah,
Criminal
yeah.
charges or no criminal charges, he admitted that he took home a 16-year-old runaway from a foster home and had sex with her along with another dude. That
Right.
right there
Yeah,
makes him a
yeah.
vile piece of shit, right? And
Hmm.
like I want to preface this, and this is not in any way a political caveat on my part, right? Is that if race aside of all people individual, if we dealt with three white individuals in the video, if there was a white woman, a white child stealing from her bag, and a white pedophile filming her, I would feel exactly the same way, right? But of course, we
Hmm.
never even heard this because that's besides
That
the
doesn't
point.
happen because
It
that
doesn't
just doesn't
happen,
happen. Yeah, like
right?
yeah, but yeah, it's. I think, and like yeah, that little detail about it made the entire thing just so much more piquant because like here's this foreigner who is attempting to morally police a young mother who from all accounts everything is kind of out of it. She seems like a like salt of the earth type. I mean, initially people were like just based on her appearance like she's probably like something like trailer trash. She probably has like a history of sex work or whatever, like everyone's
Which doesn't
speculating.
matter.
you know
She's still a
which doesn't,
mom
yeah,
with
exactly. I
family
brought this up in
business.
my article. I was like, yeah, all of this might be true because no one knew at the time when I wrote it. All of this might be true. Does not matter. Like, does not matter exactly. But then it turns out like no, like she's been with the same guy for 10 years. She's mom of like two small kids. Like there's nothing bad about her that's come out at all.
Right.
Um,
I would
so
support
she's
her
like a
if
total
she was
salt of the
black.
earth type, and this exactly, and then this creep from another country comes up and he's trying to like morally police her for her language. And then it turns out that like he's like this disgusting pedophile. And it's like, why are we putting up with this? Like this is insane. I think I think that was the sort of general reaction.
Right.
Actually, that people are
And
kind of done pretending that white people saying words is on
right.
the same level as you know, like sex crime and assault and murder. Of course, this next to the
Right.
Carmelo Anthony case a few weeks before when the entire black community sort of like locked shoulders, like closed ranks around this 17-year-old black kid who stabbed a 17-year-old white kid in the heart for no good reason at all. And like, they set up like GoFundMe for the black kid and they gave him like $500,000. So like, a lot of, and then they're all over social media, sort of like defending him and
Right.
like
Right.
saying, oh, this was self-defense because, the white kid like laid hands on him and stuff. Or it was my favorite was it was raining outside the tent.
Right.
So like,
Absurd stuff, you
like
know. And
right.
here's the thing, right? Ultimately, there's a few unanswered questions about this situation, and things that have kind of gone silent about it in the last few days. Is we still don't know what the fuck this Somali pedophile, was doing, creeping around the park.
In the park. Yeah.
All right, that
Yeah.
wasn't his kid. We don't know who
Nope.
the kid is. We don't know who the parents are. There was a claim
Nothing about the parents at all, by the way. Because
zero,
everyone's like, oh, it's
nothing,
a 5-year-old autistic kid. And where are the parents? Like either
which
the
is
parents are like
suspicious because
watching him rifle through someone else's bag,
right, which is
or the
suspicious
parents
because
like were
every
letting
time
their
there's an incident
five
like
year
this,
old.
yeah, sorry, man.
Yeah.
Like it's suspicious, right? Every time there's an incident like this, the parents of the victim or whatever, or the perpetrator, are always front and center, and they're like, "Oh, woe it's me," and blah blah blah, give me some money and all this stuff, and they're completely silent. We have heard nothing about them. Nobody's done any investigative journalism on who these parents are. Nobody's done any investigative
Mhm.
journalism on where, like, what the fuck was this Somali fatherless dude, I mean childless dude doing at a park, it's
Right. Right.
suspicious all around. The whole thing is very it triggers my media literacy suspicious bubbles, right? But
It's also immensely suspicious that the NAACP set up their own give, send, go for the black kid Probably, I assume Somali kid, although I don't think we know that yet, but just like given,
Did
and
you see
then
the
shut it
fundraising?
down.
Right, they
Yeah,
shut it
They
down.
shut it
Yeah.
down after like 3 days, yeah, and like with like no explanation for like why they were shutting it down. And then the sort of speculation there is that they realized that this is actually drawing attention, and you know, so it's sort of like known that the Somali community in Minnesota, first of all, lies through their teeth about how old their kids are. Like they'll come into the country with like a 10-year-old kid and say he's like two,
Yeah.
in order to keep the gigs coming for as long as they can. And then they also gives max by getting their um 65 IQ spawn classified as autistic, which then enables them to access all sorts of extra social services, which get laundered through Somali community organizations that provide quote unquote autism counseling in a culturally sensitive manner or whatever. And it's another giant scam that they run. So
Hmm.
like this is all of this like layer upon layer of scams.
Yeah.
And right. And
When
like this
when
was
you
kind of
guys
drawing attention towards that.
when you guys were talking about the parents, the first thing I thought of, this kid sounds like a street urchin. Because if I wanted to have freedom to rifle through bags at a park, a 5-year-old kid is exactly what I would use.
Hmm.
Right, right. I mean, it
Like a
seems like an
fag and
old gypsy trick.
Yeah,
like a
exactly.
fag
Exactly.
type thing. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Did you guys see the plan of what they were going to try to do with the money, the counter fundraising?
No,
No,
what are we
Oh
doing?
my gosh, absurd. So they were going to raise all this money so the Somali family in question could be moved around the country to follow Shiloh and her family.
what?
Like as if yes, literally I at least that's in the screenshot I saw of the Get Fun Go. And it's like, really? Really? You're going to pay this guy to move all over the country wherever this person is for the rest of his life? Yes, that's a
Like,
fantastic plan. I'm sure even they're like,
why?
even the Somali guys are going to be looking at that going, are you fucking crazy? Absolutely not. Like,
Right,
no. So it's
right.
And
just,
white people will never be able to escape us. We hate you. You're racist. And like we're gonna
right.
shadow you everywhere you go. Like
Right.
what? That's
Yeah, it's
insane.
insane. Yeah, I mean,
Like
I presume there's accuracy. I mean, I presume that's the case
I think
there.
I saw
But it's
something like
just
that. I don't
it's
know if it
yeah,
was an
it's
NAACP that did that or if it was an independent like thing, but I definitely did see that on X somewhere, you know?
it's I think this whole thing, and this is probably the most Captain Obvious thing I could possibly imagine, but this is just how ridiculous it is. It's just all of these things come together to just a perfect storm of shut the
mhm,
fuck up. Just
Right.
no.
mhm,
Just no.
mhm.
We're done. We're
That's
done.
what's
Just no.
that's what's happened over the last few
Yeah.
weeks, right? Like like last
Yeah.
month, right? I mean,
I
like
agree.
it's one of the things that I kind of like I tried to emphasize in the article was that like almost every high profile case of like black crime in the last like 30 years has like they'll take some wretched lowlife who gets involved with the law or gets shall we say disciplined by a private citizen, um, and then they'll make him out to be the victim, and then then you have like the riots and everything. If it gets taken to the maximum possible level, and then it will come out that like actually he was high on hard drugs, that he was engaged in violent crime at the time, had a long rap sheet, like just total predator, like all these things will come out afterwards, but by then the narrative's set. And then like at the Carmelo Anthony case, and here like it's open and shut. Like there was no pretending this was not what it obviously was. Um, and yet the black community reacts exactly the same way that it reacted to all the other examples of this. And everyone, so a lot of white people were like, well, hold on a second here, actually, because by now so many white people have seen the kind of drip of truth coming out after the media narrative is set. There's enough white people who are sort of like, okay, like this is messed up, and we're kind of losing patience with this. And then this was sort of like just kind of broke the camel's back. So then the Shiloh thing happens, and there's just this mass reaction of like, you know what? Nope, we're done with it. We are done with it. Like we are
Right.
not playing this game anymore. So at the beginning of the podcast, you were like, if I say the word, like my life is ruined. How much longer will that be true for? I wonder, because when you have a preference cascade like this. I mean, this woman is now like rich. I would, I would love, dearly love to say the thing I want to say, like
Right.
in
Well,
public.
so what's
Like, so she is, shall we say, word of power rich, and you can just do the translation in your mind, but like literally, but like she's been massively rewarded for this, and in that sense, this kind of message into the collective consciousness of like, well, hold on, like instead of her life being ruined,
right.
uh, rather the opposite.
And it's ultimately, this is this is something I've been thinking about like all week, right? Since this happened, I think Thursday is when this happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when I was, I was like sitting there refreshing X when all this was going on, and I was sitting down at work, and I was sitting next to my coworker who happens to be black, right? He's an African American. We were watching the videos and stuff, and kind of, both of us were kind of shit posting about it, and we pretty much both agreed on the whole thing, right? And it's interesting that like it to me it's not about like racism, like I want to be racist, I want to be a racist person or something like that. It's one of those things where there is a uneven distribution of cancellation and treatment in the cultural and political, cultural, and everything sphere that is completely like insane to where you're not allowed to notice. Now I'll go back historically speaking about myself, right? So I'm an immigrant. I moved to California when I was like a very little kid, right? And I moved to California right as the LA riots happened, right? And this was
The Rodney King riots.
the Rodney King riots, right?
The
Jesus
OG,
Christ.
the original.
And I remember all the roof Koreans, and I remember all the violence and the National Guard coming. I was like 6 years
I love
old,
that phrase.
6 or 7.
Just as a side note, roof Koreans, and then I always just think of like these really smiley gentlemen, heavily armed.
Right.
Just
You
yep,
know,
let's go.
the roof Korean is on X.
Right. And you have to understand that like when we moved here, from Eastern Europe, right, where it was a ethnically homogenous place of all, Slavic and Romanians, right? And
Mhm.
so we didn't really encounter a multicultural world until we moved to California. And our
I
first
mean, you got gypsies over
yeah, they're not human. I'm just joking. I'm gonna erase that.
there. This is like the most Eastern European thing you could say. I don't want to be racist. I'm not a racist guy. Bring up gypsies. Yeah, they're not even human.
Right. No, they're great. Actually, a gypsy, ethnically gypsy
guys,
right-wing
guys, guys.
politician won the election. Well, won the first round of the election in Romania. So, we'll
Oh,
see.
wait. Is that Georgescu guy?
No,
He's
it
gypsy?
was
No, he's gone. This is the next
it was
guy.
Simeon. It was basically the
Okay.
guy that like took up his torch because he was not allowed. Um, but
Oh,
anyways,
okay.
right. So
Interesting.
my first introduction to American multiculturalism was watching a trucker get his face smashed in by a brick in the middle of South
Jesus.
Central, right, which is Reginald Denny, right? And my parents were basically like, never talk about this stuff,
Oh,
never discuss this
that,
stuff, never voice your real opinions about how you feel about crime or anything like that, because you're going to get your face smashed in by people and nobody's going to do anything about it. You know what I mean? And that's kind of
they
like the
had they had the Derbyshire talk with you at a young
right.
age.
Right, in
Yeah.
1991, right? And then I remember a few years later, it was the O.J. Simpson trial, and anybody that watched the events around that
Hmm.
knew very well he was guilty, without a freaking doubt, right? And
Hmm.
everybody in California was terrified that if they voiced their opinion or did anything, we're going to have another Rodney King and Reginald Denny violence thing. And I remember, I think I was in sixth or seventh grade in middle school, right? And when they announced the verdict, every single black person in my school was cheering and dancing and jumping around and yelling "juice is loose" and all this stuff, right? And that really set my opinion basically, where I was like, are we really
Hmm.
celebrating a murderer? Are we really like, is
Hmm.
that what we're doing, right? And it did became a thing where like, you know what? I just don't want to be around people that celebrate murder, like maybe like
Right.
I don't know. I don't know if that's a healthy thing, but I'm an individualist in a lot of ways, right? And I have I treat, it's like the corny thing to say, like, oh, I've got like two black friends. And you know what? I grew up with a black best friend, and I know that it's, you know what I mean, right? Like, but at the same time, it's like, dog, like culturally speaking, if my culture was a mess, and you know what? Guess what? I'm Romanian. There's plenty of fucking things I can tell you wrong about Romanians, right? Or even like Southern Californian whites. I mean, I hate a lot of white people, right? But I don't think, and we can talk about this all the entire episode, right? And I think that's kind of a waste of time because you did it great in your essay, and you and Apex had a really good conversation. I was listening to it this morning, and it's been ad nauseum discussed. So I don't find the details of this event or the actual like statistics and that kind of stuff interesting. We've been there, we've talked about them. They're kind of boring.
It's been litigated to death, to
Right, right.
death
What I do
from
find
every angle.
interesting,
Yeah.
and it was actually, I actually kind of got into it with a former guest of the podcast over Substack, and like I don't know if you've seen those, Fisto,
No, what's this again?
or my little back and forth with our former guest about it with I'll tell you right now, with Gideon.
Oh, yes.
Okay, who I respect very
Yes.
much. Okay, I will make sure.
Yeah.
I think we stayed pretty civil, right? I think
Yeah,
he
you
missed.
guys did.
I think he missed the point of what's going on here, right? What's very interesting about this conversation, one, is it is the old saying, right, by a great philosopher says, if I had but one bullet, I would save it for not my enemy, but for the traitor next to me, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, if you know who I'm talking about, you're based,
Hmm.
right? I
If you
used
know,
the
you
word
know. Yeah.
if you know, you know, right? But we're talking about Romanians here, right? Um, but ultimately, you can see on X and stuff who rallied and clutched their pearls and got their panties
Yes.
in a wad. And those people are the people that are not on our side, especially coming on the
Bingo.
tail
Yeah.
of fucking backstabbers like Alex Kashuda and those people turning their backs
Mhm.
and betraying us.
Yeah.
And then we have a great example of a cultural movement forward against the neoliberal kind of regime, and we know exactly now who is our enemy, right?
And
Ultimately,
all of these like anti-woke, post-liberal, anti-cancel culture warriors, all lined up against her. Isn't that curious? It's
yeah,
all the same people who have been trying to popularize the term woke right to talk about, the actual rights in distinction to them themselves, and like patterns start to emerge after a while. Like every time that there's organic uh, pushback against something genuinely bad in the culture. And then suddenly all of these people, all these like, face bag thoughts, with their nice, comfy jobs at like think tanks and institutes and such, all suddenly are on the same page. And it's not our page. And isn't that just the funniest thing?
right. And
Yeah. Chris Bray had a really good, I'm going to look this up real quick. Chris Bray had a really good phrase for this, talking about California. Folks that are unfamiliar with this guy, he writes a Substack called "Tell Me How This Is." Tell me how this ends, and he
Chris
talks a lot about.
Bray is
I like
amazing. And
I like him a lot.
if any listeners are not reading Chris Bray, like,
Found it.
I don't know what to tell you. Like,
Yeah.
especially if you live in California, like he's your go-to
Yes.
guy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Guardian of Decay. That's the phrase. Guardians of Decay.
Ah, I love it.
Yeah,
Yes.
isn't it?
Perfect.
It really sums up what we're talking about, isn't it? With the
Mm-hmm.
wishy-washers.
Mm-hmm.
right,
Exactly. Like, oh no, we can't make things better, actually. We can't reverse any of this. We just have to, allow things to continue to rot because it would be me otherwise,
right.
Yeah. Ooh,
Um,
I need to
yeah.
correct myself slightly. He brought this to my attention, but it's by a guy named Mark McGrath, who I don't know. But listen to
Okay.
this. Listen to this paragraph. This is from McGrath. Guardians of Decay often flood the space with fear, guilt, and manufactured fatigue. They try to make questioning feel shameful, dangerous, or exhausting. The goal is to associate critical thought with social disruption, as if asking what's true is itself the problem. Next is the relentless use of logical fallacies. Rather than engaging directly, they redirect. Guardians of Decay exaggerate your position into something absurd, then argue against that version.
Right. Right. I
So
mean,
anyway, just
that's
something to think
perfect.
about. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like I said, man, what's interesting about this whole thing, besides the shit posting kind of element of it, and the kind of the culture breaking element, is that one, you can identify the people that truly, aren't on our side, because I don't care what side you're on really. And I don't care how you feel about, different ethnic minorities or anything like that or whatever. I'm a multiculturalist, and I think I made that clear during our Konstantin Hofmeister episode. I do adhere to a lot of his ideas. But ultimately, I'm on the side of a woman defending her baby and not being robbed. That's really what the
Mhm.
only side I'm on, insert
Mhm.
whoever, whatever race, I'm on that person's side, period. I'm on the woman enjoying the park without being robbed, and not being filmed by some freaking, foreigner pedophile. End of conversation when it comes to that, right? So I find it
I
interesting.
think for me, I'm sort of like more at a more fundamental level, I guess. I'm sort of like on the side of like proportionality, right? So like, okay, she had a negative altercation in a park, which resulted in some harsh words being exchanged. The proportionate response to rudeness is, yeah, rudeness, actually.
Right.
So she used a bad word, use a bad word back, okay, and then you'll both walk off your separate ways, kind of thinking like, what a jerk, and done and done. This is not a newsworthy thing. It's not. It should be like no national attention should be on this. Certainly, no one's life should be trying to ruin over something like that, right? And this happened though, so many times. People's lives got destroyed over like trivialities. Um, like this is sort of like the one of the fundamental sort of problems here. And like, yeah, like, again, like I'm not gonna pretend that I'm not gonna be on generally like a bit more tribal, maybe, but like uh at the same time, like as a general principle, like I don't think people's lives, regardless of their background, should be ruined over nonsense.
Right.
Like
Right. And,
yeah,
and trust me, I'm very tribal when it comes to this, even though she's not of my tribe. I'm not in Minnesota and I don't live up there and I don't know anything about her, whatever, right? But I'll always stick by somebody that is from my neighborhood, that looks like me, that has the shared cultural values and that kind of stuff. I think that's just the way things are, and that's the way things have always
assuming
been,
that
and the way they're
that they
gonna
didn't
be.
do something, assuming they didn't do something like genuinely heinous, right?
Right.
And I think this is
Exactly.
actually one of the big differences between our tribes, like the European tribes, if you will, and a lot of others, where like, if members of our tribes like transgress in an obvious way, we tend to punish them. Like,
Right.
like there's, whereas like there are other tribes out there who are just kind of like, no, like it doesn't matter what they did, like they're our tribe, so they did nothing wrong. And like you actually, it's hard to find common ground there because it ends up being very asymmetrical. And I
Right.
wanted so you were talking about like, speaking of tribes, right? You were talking about how like, these people who are not our friends like keep revealing themselves. And I want to like dig into that. It's actually really interesting. So, what are the sides there actually?
All right.
Because
Well,
it's
I
not
actually I was going to go into that next, right? Because I was going to kind of
right.
go.
Yeah. 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 Okay. Great.
So one interesting topic is, noticing who is not on our side, right, or on the side
Mm-hmm.
of her, right. The other interesting thing is that a lot of people fail to miss, and this is my opinion, right, that this is not a black black American versus white American conversation, right? It's almost as if black Americans are irrelevant to this conversation. This is a white American versus white American conversation, right? Because the ideas that give the word of power and the political and legal rights that are, given in this situation are truly a 20th century, progressive, neoliberal white idea, right? um, this whole milieu that we've lived in for, for my entire life is a product of the 20th century, right? And it ultimately requires a white majority country to even entertain, right? And what's interesting, right, is that now that we are like speeding into the 21st century, we're we're a good quarter of the way in it. Well, exactly a quarter of the way in, right? With the United States becoming the multicultural minority majority nation, right? It is tribalizing because that's what happens when you no longer have a majority, right? We are
Hmm.
we are heading straight towards a Yugoslavia kind of situation, right? Where we're instead of becoming Americans, we're becoming, Croatians, Serbians, Bosnians, or whatever the dissolution
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
Yugoslavia. Um, and the idea of this kind of united legal like entity, right, is really a 20th century boomer idea that, is going away with their generation as they enter the grave, right? And what's really interesting, right? Um, this is all the doing of the left. It is not a doing of the right, because definitely not the conservative right, because the traditional conservative right and the liberal left, right, and I'm talking about the majority, Caucasian Americans, right? They were always okay with giving preferential treatment towards African Americans or different minorities out of, guilt or out of historical crimes, grievances, whatever it is, right? But the idea was that they supported that because that was the ideal of America. But in the last, 6 to 10 years, right, it's been drilled into the heads of most people by the liberal progressive left that this is not your country, white dude. This is our country. It's, you're no longer welcome here. Your ideas are outdated, blah, 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 right? So if if back in the 90s you could basically shut up and you sacrifice your own, truth or your own reality, right, for the greater good because you're all Americans, that could be sold as an idea. But time and time again in the last decade, or actually more than that, those same people that were sacrificing everything and saying, yeah, okay, whatever, I'll be quiet and walk away because of whatever, now are being have been told it's not your country anymore. It's not. It's game over. We're going to tear down your statues. We're going to build our statue. We're going to do our things. Even like your bummed up, bumfuck places like Minnesota are no longer like, for you or for your children anymore. So get used to it. You're dying, right? Well, why am I going to sacrifice now? You know what I mean? I'm going to become just as tribal
Hmm.
as that. And this is what the conversation is that it's not really a conversation between it's not really a multiracial conversation. It is a white American talking to other white Americans, and they're talking about like, are we still going to hold on to this 20th century belief that we are going to give preferential treatment to others at the expense of our children? That's really what the conversation is,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. It's one group of so-called conservatives who want to conserve the post-war liberal consensus as like kind of like that's their conservatism. Um, and uh, and another group who were like, well, that's obviously just dead now. That's not the way forward for anyone. That's just not going to work. Like we can't be the one group as a minority, no less, who is sort of like going along with this polite fiction of a universal culture when we're surrounded by extremely tribal ethnic groups that do not are not even pretending to go along with
Right,
that polite fiction, and in
right,
Yeah.
fact just use it as a weapon against us. And yeah, I mean that's basically what it comes down to.
right,
It's a sort of like almost it is sort of something of a religious conflict because the U.S. like you've got sort of two civic religions, right? There's like the Constitution, and then there's civil rights as like the second American civic religion. These conservatives, I mean, they pretend that they're constitutionalists, but I think like at a functional level, they're civil rights activists, actually. Like Um, and then in somewhat, I guess the pagans in this case would be like that much smaller group who kind of like are sort of like, well, not so sure about the Constitution, but also the civil rights thing is terrible. Maybe we need something new, you know? And I think like, like Yarvin, for example, the dark enlightenment people, like they kind of increasingly fall into that category of sort of like criticizing all of it and not being aligned with any of it. But the fundamental arguments is kind of between like those two largest groups, I think.
Right. And what's interesting, we've been told that, you know, in the progressive civic religion, right? Multiculturalism is the ideal, and that's okay. That's fine. I can see that working. And unfortunately, though, a lot of progressive ideas do not work under multiculturalism because with multiculturalism, where you have identical groups, you need you're either going to devolve into tribalism or
Mhm.
you need a very strong man over like overlord government, like
Yeah,
T
you can't do democracy. You just
right. You
can't.
need like Tito in Yugoslavia or
Lee
Singapore.
Kuan Yew,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
Right.
Singapore, yeah.
That applies the law evenly with a very heavy hand and keeps tribal differences under check, right? A
You also to make multiculturalism work in that, which is historically I think multiculturalism has been new thing, but like empires have been around since before the Assyrians. So it's not that new. But to make multiculturalism work, and this has been understood pretty much from the beginning of the first imperial political order, um, you actually need freedom of association, meaning that each one of the tribes needs to kind of have its own territory, and those boundaries need to be kind of respected by the other tribes, because otherwise you have conflict, right? And it's like, okay, the tribes are all subjugated to hegemons as pay tribute to them, or whatever. When there's a war, they all sort of reluctantly fight on the side of the hegemon, whatever. Um, but you can't sort of have the tribes button up against each other, or it just turns into total chaos.
right,
And this is same in like in an urban setting. Right? You're going to have those ethnic neighborhoods, and you need to respect those boundaries. But the Progs, they're like, oh no, like you can't actually do that, like, because that's discrimination. So you're not allowed to have ethnically exclusive boundaries in living areas, or at least white people aren't allowed to have that. Which gets back to the thing that everyone's allowed to be tribal except for the white people, right? Which then constantly puts the white people defensive and causes a huge amount of pathology. If the whites are allowed to be just kind of tribal and be like, no, sorry, like this neighborhood is only for Polish people, whatever, um, like have like neighborhood covenants like that, then I think there would actually be quite a bit more general sort of amity. People just kind of like keep to themselves and live according to their own ways, and it would be fine. But
right, right. And we're looking at the way things are kind of like falling, it's kind of how the chips are falling down. And people like to pretend that this is like a new observation or it's like fresh and new, but Yarvin himself pointed this kind of stuff out in his early work, and you can see. I often say that this conversation has really nothing to do with African Americans for the most part, because in a truly multicultural minority majority situation, that group is almost irrelevant to the conversation on basically on a percentage alone, of population percentage, right? You look at basically what you had in Southern California is a complete and total ethnic cleansing of African Americans from
by the
traditional.
Hispanics, yeah,
Hmm?
by the
Yeah, but the
Mexicans,
Hispanics, right? They're gone
yeah,
from
yeah, yeah.
Southern California, right? And nobody, not
Mm-hmm.
one liberal person has mentioned this or even talked about it. I know David, whatever
Mm-hmm.
from Tachymag, who lives in Los Angeles, has pointed it out numerous times, but I saw it with my own eyes. I grew up in Long Beach, California, which It was next door to North Long Beach, which is next door to Compton and Inglewood. And during our life, those were traditional black neighborhoods, right? This is where, where the home of Death Row Records, Snoop Dogg, Tupac came out of. Snoop
Mm,
Dogg went to the high
hmm.
school that was like my sister high schools. These were historically, I mean, in the post-Civil War America, not Civil War, Civil Rights America, were historical black neighborhoods in Southern California, right? I remember you drove through Compton and stuff, and there were black people everywhere, right? If you go to California right now, today, and you drive through, where, the Snoop Dogg videos were filmed, and go by in those neighborhoods, it's the barrio. You'll have taco stands and Mexican families, right? Because all
Hmm.
African Americans in Southern California got driven out by a violent element of Hispanic gang culture, right? And they
Yeah.
they got pushed out on
Yeah, they're
both.
all in like, and they're all like in like ex-urban communities now, right?
Correct.
That's
Or they
that's
moved to
yeah.
Arizona and Nevada, and they got
Hmm.
pushed out, not just by the, violent Mexican mafia like backed gangs, that crossed the border in the last 20, 30 years, but they also got pushed back by the LAPD. And the LAPD, if you look at the population, the ethnic makeup of the LAPD, right? The same,
Heavily Hispanic.
it's heavily Hispanic, right?
Hmm.
This is the same LAPD that in 1991, was attacked, and they were behind the LA riots with the with the
Hmm.
Rodney King beating and that kind of stuff, where it was all a bunch of white officers, right? Now that would not happen
Hmm.
because, well, there's no more white people in the LAPD, right? They're all named, the white ones are, even those guys have like Hernandez as last name, right? And that goes for the same
Right.
for all the sheriff departments, the local PDs, all that is a Hispanic majority now. And California itself is a Hispanic majority. And the greatest illustrator of this, right, is that when Rodney King was beat up by the police, there was riots, right? There was scary major riots, right? And the majority
Mm.
of the people rioting were African American, right? You fast forward 20 years to the Black Lives Matter and the whole, thing, and there was nothing but a fart when it came to that element and those riots. There was nothing in Los Angeles. The city that burned during 1991 LA riots was basically, there was nothing, right? I have friends that are police officers, right? And I was overseas. I was traveling during that nonsense, right? During the whole COVID era and everything. And I remember I called my buddy. I was like, "Hey man, you gonna be okay? Are you gonna work overtime?" And he was bummed out, right? He was bummed out that he was not getting any overtime to work the riots because there weren't any riots. And I asked him, why, what's going on? Why not? And he said, well, the Mexican mafia told all their lower gangs, right? Their street soldiers that, that pay homage to you because it's like a feudal system, right? They told them,
Hmm.
do not make a stink about this because it's going to mess up. Like, we have nothing to gain from this, right?
Mm.
Except the
Mm.
crackdown on Hispanics, right? So there was nothing. If you look at, there was like some police disturbances and like kind of like craziness in Los Angeles for a few days. If you look at who was taking part in that, it was like white college students acting up.
Right.
You know, it wasn't
Right.
the
Yeah.
the people that were smashing Korean stores and that kind of stuff at like back in 1991, right? It wasn't a genuine anger at the way things were going or anything like that. It was a completely inorganic, college-driven, like nonsense. It was a LARP, and the police treated it like a LARP, and nothing happened, in Los Angeles because there wasn't anybody to riot, you know, because it was the population displacement was completely over. And the reality is, and this is the fact that a liberal activist or whatever has to come to the realization that in a multicultural America where you have lots of Hispanics and Asians and now Indians coming in like in Canada and stuff like that, those people just don't give a fuck about your 1960s pet projects. You know what I mean? To them, it's if
But they are real happy to use that for their own
Right. I was
purposes,
going to say that
right?
if they're involved, it
Yeah,
isn't self-opportunistic, self-interest sort of way, you know?
yeah. You see this with the Indians in Canada all the time. They will because they're relatively intelligent, at least until a couple of years ago when we started scraping the bottom of the barrel. But like, they used to be, and they understood very, very quickly that they could just like adopt this rhetoric about like white privilege and all the rest of it, and weaponize it against white people. So then, okay, so you have like a diversity hiring initiative. So they would use that to kind of like get in to the banks, for example. When you walk into a bank in Toronto now, and it's just all brown people. Like there's no white people working in the banks.
Right.
Because they'll get in using the diversity thing, and then like by saying the magic diversity words, they can justify just only hiring their own people and just turning it into like an ethnic mafia essentially. And the white people are all completely morally disarmed. And like sometimes we even have interactions with them one on one, where they'll be trying to pull this shit on. And if you sort of signal that it doesn't work on you personally, like
Right. Right.
you're not one of the brainwashed whites, right? They'll just kind of laugh and like I tried, but then like something get a little mean too. They're like, yeah, but like the rest of you white people, you're not going to wake up in time, so like you're just going to use this to replace you essentially. It's all
Right.
sort of
Which,
very
which brings the fact, back to the original incident. Dude, you're Somali. Those words have nothing to do with you, There
right,
is no
right, exactly.
historical connection to you, You don't even look like an African American. Okay? Somalians don't even look like.
You don't even get along with the African Americans. Like we all know like the home team blacks do not like the Somalis and vice versa.
Right.
Stop pretending you're on their side.
Right, that's kind of the interesting thing. It's like, a Somali and an African American is as different as like me, an Eastern European, and a Irish dude,
More so, and genetically, even more so.
Right.
Yeah,
Culturally, just completely different culture. It's to me, it's absurd, and it is an opportunistic kind of like taking advantage of American historical stuff. And I've sat through arguments with black friends that were exceptionally like angry at African immigrants who are and they're saying stuff like what the hell? Well, what are you what are you trying to hop onto this bandwagon and taking advantage of these like opportunities that were set aside specifically for us due to historical
specifically,
region,
right. Yes, exactly. And then they just kind of get muscled aside by like these like Nigerians or whatever
Right.
who come in and kind of like are like, oh yes, reparations for slavery, and affirmative action. I will happily take advantage of that. Uh, and because they tend to be like maybe a little bit better educated and a little bit more pro-social than your average hood rat African American. And then the white people kind of like quietly like will like put them into the diversity box as a way of checking that off rather than dealing with one of the homegrown blacks, you know which is actually deeply unfair. And if I were them, I'd be very
No,
very
I would be
angry about
absolutely,
that.
I
But
would
yeah,
absolutely be pissed off,
right.
right? Because it's like, wait a second, okay? Now, whether you think it's right or wrong to have, affirmative action, preferential treatment, or whatever, that's irrelevant to this conversation, right? What's relevant is that, like, okay, we've agreed to do that kind of stuff, and there are quotas or whatever in certain jobs, or there used to be. I don't know what's going on, but there, like wait a second, you just got here yesterday. You don't have a grandfather that was economically, held back by, racist policies, redlining or whatever, you don't have any
I
of that
think
stuff.
I think what we're seeing is almost this kind of the universalization of American race culture that pushed out to the fringes of the empire and is now kind of like coming back, right? So
Right.
like a lot of this discourse was sort of quite specifically developed in the context of the African American experience. Um, and like all the white guilt, like all of it was kind of blossomed out of that, right? And then after America sort of conquered the world, those social mores were sort of like pushed out to the imperial provinces, where like the local elites would kind of pick them up because, like, okay, you know, like it's sort of fashionable to have some form of racial guilt, right? And then they would just, but because they didn't have their own African Americans, they had to find someone else to apply that to. So, like, you know, like in France, it would be applied to, like, you know, the Algerians, or in Britain, it would be applied to Indians and Pakistanis, and so on and so forth.
Right.
Um, which then had the effect of universalizing that to the point where basically, if you are not white, you get to partake of the privileges associated with the African Americans. And then this becomes, I mean, completely like unjust and unsustainable very quickly. I mean, again, regardless of what you think of affirmative action or what have you, which I'm obviously completely opposed to on principle. You know, when you're talking about 13% of the American population, that's one thing. You know,
Right.
when you're talking about 94% of the planet, that's something else,
Right, right, exactly.
right?
Not to
Yeah,
mention, historically speaking, if you really want to, like, get autistic about it, it's like those Africans are the people that sold the slaves in the first place, and that's why you're getting, what,
yeah,
like, what the fuck are we talking about
yeah,
here? Those Africans are just as
yeah.
guilty of, the crimes against African Americans as the British, colonists that purchased, it's such an absurd.
Or 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 like the Muslims who only pretended to stop using slaves because we literally forced them at the point of a gun to stop using slaves. But
Right,
now they'll like kind of turn around and try to turn this like that kind of rhetoric, our own sort of like morality back against us.
right.
Like it's
I'm sorry. I'm listening to this whole conversation, and the thought just popped into my mind. Man, fuck the Enlightenment. Like at the end of dude, at the end of the day, it seems to me we are living through the detachment of our societies from reality. And it is
Mm,
no longer about anything beyond short-term self-interest, especially for the elites and for the folks in charge. I mean, a lot of that guardian to decay stuff, they're guarding the decay so they can loot the shit out of it before it finally collapses. You know what I mean?
yeah. That's why I
And
mentioned like the fact that all these people seem to be connected in some way or another to some like
yeah,
institute or think tank or whatever, like they know what side their bread is buttered on, and like, we all kind of
yeah.
see that. Yeah.
There's nothing transcendental. There's no higher purpose to unite nations anymore. So all that's left is the hustle.
Right.
Yeah, so this
That's
is
it.
a really interesting thing that I've noticed with the rhetoric coming out of the Trump administration uh, since he returned to office, which has been largely devoid of the sort of mawkish ideological moralizing that characterized governance in the 20th century, and is sort of returning to this sort of just realpolitik, basically.
Yes.
Like, like
Yes.
this is good for us, so we are going to do it, and not trying to dress it up as like some kind of moral crusade or whatever. It's just kind of like, nope, national security. This is, this will make us richer. This will make us more secure. Um, and you see the same kind of thing happening in other countries as well. Like Europe is way behind the times on this. Their elites are still clinging on to this shit. But certainly the Russians, the Chinese, like they're not really playing the moralizing ideology game either. The direction this goes is this sort of reassertion of reality, like centering actual reality
Yeah. It
in
reminded me
political discussions.
when you were talking about Rome earlier and how they got all the different tribes to get along. Well, one thing Rome did also was build the roads and build the harbors and build the aqueducts. There were benefits to getting along too. It wasn't all
Yes,
stick. There was quite a lot of carrot
initially,
also.
initially, I mean, like even the
Yeah, yeah,
400s
yeah.
and the tax burden, of course, it starts to when the
Right.
administrative state starts to go, yeah. But no, I mean, like, yeah, like the first, second century AD, first century BC, like it was way better to be part of the Roman Empire. just a cost of living or standard of living basis. Yeah.
Well, that's ultimately, and this is where ultimately the real politic of it lies, right? The thing is that we have a significant problem with law, order, and safety, okay? There is significant swaths of our first world country that are unsafe to go into, to be able to take your kids to the park, to just live a normal life. The biggest, victims of it are poor people, poor minorities, mostly minorities of all races, and recent immigrants are trapped in cities and neighborhoods and locations that are overwhelmed with drug abuse, violence, and all kinds of just garbage, and that's not what we want. That's not what a society thrives on, right? We need to be able to, you know, get to the bottom of what the hell's causing this stuff. And we need to like be honest about it. We need to be like, hey, listen, I want a safe park where nobody's robbing my shit when I'm watching my kid play in the playground. Okay, done, simple. And I don't like I don't want my life ruined because I say something about somebody robbing me. And that's the world that we all deserve, whether white, black, Asian, or whatever, deserve to live in, because that's where we work,
Yeah.
that's why we pay taxes, that's what we need, right? And all the people that are wringing their panties in a bunch about this kind of stuff just need to shut the fuck up, right? Because ultimately what it's about is we need to create an environment where a mom can take their kid to a park and their shit is not robbed and a pedophile is not filming them. That's the only damn thing that matters, right? That's the only
Which is
thing.
actually a really low bar,
Very low
and
bar.
like,
Yeah.
and this, and
I
this,
think I
this connects actually to a
yeah.
lot of other things, I mean, like, it's not just like that. I mean, services that actually function, that like, that do what they say they're going to do, products that actually work, roads that are actually drivable, infrastructure that is actually like, usable, like, all of these sorts of things. And you know, we've seen this kind of almost cliche, a couple of years after that famous essay was written on Palladium, but like, you know, the competence crisis in all of our
Yes, I was just thinking
institutions,
of
like
that. Yep.
nothing, right, exactly, like
Yep.
nothing,
Yep. Yep.
nothing works anymore because they filled up with these people who got there, either because they ticked a diversity box or because they learned how to say all the right things, and like none of them are there because they actually know what they're doing. None of them have any actual, I mean, I don't want to exaggerate and say none of them, but it's pretty grim, in fact. And like we just need to kind of clear these people out and like put in like people who are just like we're not even ideological, who are just like practical and like, okay, how do we make shit function? Like um and like,
Hmm.
obviously a part of a functioning society is that like you have nice parks that aren't full of like, thieves and pedophiles and drug addicts and like homeless people and like needles in the sandbox. And like you just don't have these things. You have like nice public spaces that are pleasant to be in
Right, you have
and
Japan.
are, yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
Not
exactly,
California.
right,
when I was living in
right.
Tokyo, and I know you spent some time in Tokyo yourself. I saw in one
Yeah,
of
I
your
didn't know you
posts.
lived there. That's cool. Yeah, how long were you there
I
for?
was there for three and a half years, right?
Oh
And
wow, you
when
hung
I
out with
was
us
there,
once?
I remember like every time we went in a train or we took a train or we went to like like an event in Yoyogi Park, and there was just like hundreds of thousands of people everywhere,
Dude, yes.
you know,
And they'd be like, and you have all these like little groups of people, like one group would be doing like swing dancing or something,
right.
like rockabilly dancing, and another group is like fighting with lightsabers or like, having like samurai fights with like wooden katanas or
Right, and
something.
there's
So
a
then all
wedding
another
in the
group's doing
corner.
yoga. There's a rave happening off like, like in another part. Like it's
And it's
yeah.
clean and it's nice and it's normal and it's like there's
Mm-hmm.
no violence breaking out, And I remember
Mm-hmm.
always like my wife and I would always be like, why can't we have this back home? You know,
Yeah.
why can't I go to a country fair? There was a country I was living in Ventura County, which is north of Los Angeles, and every time there was a county fair, every year somebody got murdered at the damn county fair. you know?
Hmm.
Like you just don't go because somebody's going to get murdered. It's just like you don't want to be the person that's there trampled when somebody pops off a gun over for whatever stupid reason, you know? Like
Hmm.
you can't have nice shit in the United
The
States.
problem is it's the quality of the people, right? So like, you take like the clean streets in Tokyo. Why are they clean? Well, it turns out they don't even have a bylaw against littering
They don't have trash
because
cans.
they don't even have trash cans. Actually, they took the trash cans out in the 1990s because I think it was like the Shurikyo cult was like putting like nerve gas in them, so they got rid of all the trash cans. But there's still no trash in the ground because like they just don't litter. They don't even need to tell people not to litter. Like Japanese people are simply capable. They're capable of second order thought, right? It's like the first order thought. I have garbage in my hand. I don't. This is annoying. I will just throw it on the ground. Second order thought. If I do that and then everyone else does that, I live in a garbage dump. I don't want to live in a garbage dump, so I won't litter, right? And then if everyone has that second order thinking, then you live in a nice clean place. And if you don't, you live in Mumbai, you know?
Right,
And
exactly.
right. And like the Japanese are like they're extremely good at this, right? So like you get onto like one of their trains and it's quiet, you can hear a pin drop. It's
It's like a
crowded,
library,
but you can
man.
hear
It's
a
like a
pin drop.
library on a
Right.
train.
And like they text, no one's talking, damn sure no one's on speakerphone. If someone absolutely has to take a call, they're like cupping the receiver in their hands and like whispering into it and doing these like, little half bows to like all of the people around to apologize for like, making noise, like they're just, and this is why people are like, they'll ask like, oh, it's like Tokyo, it's so crowded and they isn't overwhelming. And it's like actually because they all are so respectful of like personal space.
Right.
Um,
So here's
and
a
they go out
question.
of their way to like make sure it's clean and nice and safe. Like it doesn't even feel crowded, actually. Like
Yeah.
it's just lovely. Like,
Right.
yeah.
And you people sleep on
So
the
guys,
train, they lean their heads on each other and like, strangers, you can't sleep on a train in the US because second you pass out, you're gonna have some homeless guy's dick in your face, and it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
or somebody's gonna be rifling through your wallet. And it's just it's
I, I,
sad.
I, I did that one time. I came back from a nightclub and passed out on the way home and then woke up at the net. I woke up as the train was like two stops away from my home station going in the wrong direction was like, ah, shit. Like I ended up like bouncing back and forth a couple times before I finally actually got back to my apartment. But like,
Right.
which is like a funny story, or whatever. Yeah, yeah. If I did that in like New York City, I would have gotten like robbed. Like I would have woken up like, oh, there's my wallet gone, there's my phone gone.
Yeah. And I'm dead on the side of the road.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
so why are the Japanese like this? I'd love to hear your guys' take on that. And then how do we get that here, or is that even something we want here? I don't want to
My
presume,
take,
but what do you guys
my
think?
take, my take is like 2,000 years of absolutely ruthless eugenic selective pressure for
Yeah,
politeness.
yeah. I was
Like
thinking of
we're like,
like just
if
getting,
you if you
yeah,
if you talk back to like one of the samurai, they just cut your head off.
Right.
And like, and like, you're like
base
2,000 years of
Tokugawa,
that.
base to Tokugawa. That's what
Yeah,
we need.
totally. A couple thousand years of that, and like you sort of you,
Done.
you weed
Yeah.
out the genes for any sort of antisocial behavior.
Yeah.
That's I think that's
Right. And I think there's, the population density sort of forces that behavior because
Yeah,
Japan
there's
is,
nowhere else to go.
no. I don't really. I don't.
you know what,
I
you're right,
disagree.
because like then you'd have the same thing in
India,
India, which is the exact
yeah,
opposite,
Oh.
right. And there's and
Hmm.
there's no eugenic trend towards cleanliness and respect and quiet in India, right? Like because they haven't bred for that. India instead, they decided, in the Aryan South caste system, like 3,000 years ago or whatever, the world's largest eugenic breeding experiment. They're like, oh, we're gonna like, deliberately breed a bunch of underclasses. It's like I guess it sounded like a good idea at the time. Um, but it's obviously been a disaster. Uh, Whereas the Japanese, like, yeah, they bred for peace and quiet, I guess.
yeah,
But it does like the juxtaposition does to me point to something actually very interesting because at a more abstract level, you often hear like Malthusian types talk about the problem of overpopulation. You have 8 billion people, that's too many. Restraining the world's resources and so on. And then I look at Japan. and like, and it's just like the entire archipelago is just like, the cities are like pristine, and like, and then they have like their wilderness areas are again like pristine and like beautiful, and like, you know, and then I look at India, which is like a wasteland. And it's like, I don't actually think the issue is the number of people. I think it's the quality of the people. If you have a higher quality of person, you have a much higher population density without any problems whatsoever. But if you
Right.
have a much lower quality of person, then actually even at much, much lower population densities, you start running into severe problems.
Right. I mean, you see the interesting kind of in between those two cultures is the Chinese. And the Chinese have the high population density of India. And they do have a tendency to be very tribalistic and kind of, you know, historically speaking, through the 19th century and early 20th century, it wasn't the cleanliest place. You can look at places like Kowloon City in Hong Kong, where they're just a miserable, crime-ridden place. But with the with the post Mao kind of cultural revolution and stuff, they've become exceptionally heavy handed in policing and enforcing new cultural standards upon an older generation of people that could have
Mm.
easily gone the way of India. Beijing could have been Mumbai, quite easily, but it's not. It's more like Japan if you spend any time in those cities. And
Which is funny because like the Japanese stereotype of the Chinese, they consider them to be a chaotic and filthy people,
right,
rude and ill-mannered and the whole bit. And my personal experience has been that there's some truth to that. They're not as bad as the Indians, obviously, but like, I still hear stories about like, gutter oil, being used to cook food in China and stuff. So
right.
I kind of suspect that like the CCP sort of its iron hand sort of like maintains some parts of the country as kind of like showpiece
Right.
areas, and
That's kind
then
of what I was
there's
saying
other
is that
parts
like
that are yeah.
their strict hand basically creates. And then you look at you look at Taiwan, for example, and if you ever been to Taipei, which I've been to, and it's one of my favorite cities I've ever traveled to. Taipei
Mm.
is a city that I found more clean and orderly than Tokyo. And it's a newer
Oh,
city, and its train station, its train setup and everything was much more. And I remember when we went to go visit Taipei for the first time, we got a like an Airbnb type, like kind of a boutique hotel, and it was right in the center of the city next to this giant park, which kind of I forgot what the park was called, but it was a kind of Central Park type of place, right? And I was kind of nervous. I was like, we're by a park, and parks are kind of murdery, I don't really know much about this place, right? And I was kind of nervous. And when the first night, I think it was like 2 in the morning, we're like, okay, let's go walk to this bar like across the park. So we're gonna have to travel through this park on foot, my wife and I, to get to this like rock and roll bar. It was like this vintage, like David Bowie themed bar that we wanted to go to. And you could still smoke inside places in Taipei when we were there. I don't know if you can still, right? It's a great city. And we cross the street from our little boutique hotel, and we're walking through this giant, like, park in the middle of the night. And there are women by themselves doing like Tai Chi and stuff, right? And right away I was like, okay, yeah,
yeah.
this place is
This
safe.
is this is this is going to be just like Tokyo, where it's like completely safe, and yeah. Um, I think it's very interesting to note that like Taiwan, at least my understanding, is that they had a pretty large cultural influence from the Kuomintang,
They do.
right?
They do.
Yeah, and I can't help but suspect that played a pretty big role in why Taiwan is so orderly and like well run and clean and safe. Because you have this influx of all of these kind of like Chad high tea nationalist warriors at the end of the Second World War, where they, like got kind of chased out by the communists. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and like that kind of person is going to like they're going to impose a certain sort of society, right?
Right.
And
So
like just
and
like
there
anecdotally, Like there's that stereotype of like the Chinese guy as being this kind of wimpy manlet, right? And especially when it comes to like Happas. But all of the descendants, and I've met a few of them over the years, like in the US and Canada, who were like Chinese guys who were like descended from Kuomintang. And every single one of them was a Chad.
Right. No, I
Like
agree.
like strong features, like like physically quite fit,
Yeah.
strong personality, like the whole bit, and like and yeah, so like there's definitely been interesting, and I would love actually to see the actual ethnic breakdown because I know that um, China is not just the Han. You also have a bunch of other groups there, many of whom had a kind of more of a warrior caste aspect to them, which I suspect may well have been overrepresented in the Kuomintang. I mean, I don't know enough to make
I need
that
to.
statement definitively,
You
but
know, it'd be fun. It'd be fun. I've got a biography of Chiang Kai-shek sitting on my dresser, and
oh yeah.
it was written by my Russian history professor back in college. Victory and Defeat is the name of the book. But his position was always Chiang Kai-shek basically whooped the shit out of everybody, was this incredibly
Hmm.
brutal dictator, and it was just
Hmm.
hashtag deal with it. So
Right.
like the having Taiwan be
Yeah.
like, yeah, of course. I mean, he comes from the guy who lost to Mao. Like, you think that guy's going to be, that guy's going to be weak? No, that civil war lasted what, 20 years, and then they dealt with the Japanese in the middle of it. No, man, those
Hmm.
guys are all going to be freaking nuts,
Right.
and
And
they're the
it's
losers.
interesting
you
enough,
know?
when we were staying in Taipei, at the hotel we were at, the Kuomintang Chiang
Hmm.
Kai-shek Memorial Museum, National Museum, was like a block away, and that's actually the first touristy place I visited the
Oh,
next
that's
morning.
cool.
And
That's
they have it's
cool.
like a huge garden. Taiwan has also a very heavy Japanese influence that maybe they probably won't admit,
Mm.
but a lot of the stuff looks Japanese, or maybe it's the other way around. They share kind of a cultural like ancestral base type of thing.
A little bit of both.
But and
Mm.
it's very like if you're like a anime dork, and you like what do you call it, like those movies, the Studio Ghibli movies,
The Ghibli movies, yeah, right.
right?
Yeah, Miyazaki.
The Miyazaki movie, the one Spirited Away, is actually the whole tea house and everything is actually based on a place outside of Taipei in
Hmm.
Taiwan. So we actually went and visited that place, and it looks like the tea house in the movie, like that little town and everything is like, Miyazaki basically took it, and built it, so it's a very interesting kind of thing. Um, but yeah, what I think, and I'm going to kind of pivot the conversation a bit in a different direction now because we've kind of exhausted this thing, right? Um,
We've gone
one of
all over
your
the world.
it's going to be connected.
Well,
So
actually, I just want to throw one more thing in there, which is that at the other city that I've been to where I got a similar vibe to Tokyo in terms of drunk women being able to stumble home at 3 o'clock in the morning without a care in the world was Belgrade.
really,
Hmm.
It, yes, like you could just tell from the way that people carried themselves there, from the way the women behaved. No one was scared. Like there were no cops anywhere. I mean, not like literally no one, but like I was there for like 2 months, and it would be pretty rare that I see cops walking around. Um, and like that's another thing. If there are a few police officers, it's usually an indication that either you're in like a high, really, really, really high crime area, or like there's just no need for them, right? And then like the vibe you got from the people is like no one was really worried about like petty crime or sexual assault or anything like that. You go to the bars, you go see any bar fights, and the way people interact with each other was very sort of casual and like loving, actually.
well,
Um,
that's most of Eastern
and
Europe, to be honest,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah, totally.
And I think a lot of
Yeah,
it comes from the communist era, where if you did anything, you just get disappeared.
sure,
You
sure.
know,
I suspect in the case of uh, the Balkans, that's probably also related to the Civil War in a certain respect.
Yeah.
Because like
Right.
when all of the guys are armed to the teeth, which like Turkey is like the fifth most heavily armed country on the planet for private citizens, and like they're basically all like veterans of a horrible war and know their way around violence like that. Armed society, the polite society, like no one's. You mess with a girl, she's someone's sister, and that guy and his friends are going to track you down and do terrible, terrible things to you in some awful basement. So,
Right.
like, right, like,
You don't want Nico get a hand of you. This guy was like filling mass graves like 15 years ago, and he's the last thing
exactly.
you want. You're like, listen, I'm gonna get
Yeah.
disappeared on my vacation. I don't
Yeah,
want.
one more is not going to really affect his ledger
Right.
all that much.
But
No.
right. So you have a crap ton of great articles on Substack, right? I mean, I think you have over 20,000 followers. I think everybody's mentioned you or quoted you to a certain degree. Um, like Dave Green, has mentioned your article a lot. And I think, and I agree with Dave Green that you're one of your best articles, and the one that kind of plays into what we're going to talk, where we're talking about is the article, the involution of the liberal mind, right?
Oh yeah.
Mm.
Right.
And it's, I mean, if you're listening right now, stop, hit pause, go read it, and come back. Okay, ready, done, do it. All right. Um, and what kind of the thesis of it is that the liberal progressive mind is fully broken now because they are like like an AI, like a language model that has been fed the same nonsense in different iterations of its own thing, and it's just degraded to the
Hmm.
point of like sociopathic like schizophrenia. And you see that in the kind of in the response to Shiloh or whatever, because there hasn't been a very coherent response about anything in the last few months.
No, no. They just like so was it's a good point. So like with Shiloh, they just kind of I mean, all the expected stuff they screamed about racism and spewing hate and whatever. It's like, okay, yeah, we understand that's the expected model output. Um, but none of it was like inventive or creative or like surprising in any way. And you see this also in like their entertainment products, which have been just rapidly degrading in quality. Um, yeah, yeah, you see this in their entire discourse. You see this in their complete inability to respond
To anything.
at even a tactically efficacious level to their loss of the 2024 election.
Right.
Like, forget about strategy, right? But like, her whole discourse around like, oh, we lost the young men. Well, what do we do about that? And like, no ability to sort of, like evaluate core values or policies to see like, oh, like is maybe some of the things that we actually trying to do is that why we left was like, oh, we'll just try to change the messaging, because it's all just like a media model to them. It's all like there's no reality actually.
Right.
Yeah.
There is a complete lack of discourse, right? Like we've gotten to the point where you can't even like have a conversation about anything with anybody. Like all discourse right now on the interwebs, is really just right wing people talking to right wing people. It's
Yes.
it kind of it fundamentally kind of explains the little defections we had like 2 weeks ago or whatever, because those people are ultimately financial opportunists, right? They
They're
believe
also
in.
they're the Sorry to cut you off, because there's something I was going to say before we were talking about them, uh, and it's very relevant. Right? So, a few months ago, all of the lefties, not literally all of them, but most of them, seemingly sort of abandoned Twitter to go to Blue Sky, and then since then, these sort of brown nosing conservative types basically stepped into the discursive role that the left had played, right? And
Right.
like you've seen like an increasingly bitter conflict between the right and Con Inc. like since then. And with Con Inc. increasingly adopting the rhetorical positions that were adopted by the left. They basically become the new left, right? But
Right,
the
right. That's
actual
really
original
it.
left has like fallen apart completely due to like, in my opinion, like this just consuming nothing but their own propaganda and never actually checking in with the real world, because so much of the real world has been ruled out of bounds as, well, that's bad. You can't even think about that, right? Um, which also connects actually to the language taboo of certain all these words that you can't say, thoughts that you can't think, facts that you can't know. Like it's all sort of connects together.
Right. It's become like when I see anything by a leftist, I immediately now assume that there are some like senile boomer brain retard instantly. It's just like
Mm.
I just like 5 years ago somebody like commented something on something I would post or a conversation, I would like engage. Now I'm like delete, don't care. There's nothing to talk about to some like boomer brain like senile old man whose idea of like resistance is scratching up somebody's Tesla. This is just absurd. It's stupid. You're dumb. Delete. Like no
And when
no
you
desire.
and when you see one of their text walls, like you don't even have to read the whole thing, right? It's like you know what they're going to say, you know all the talking points, and you know that if you do engage, like I just had like an engagement like this actually earlier today with someone on Notes, some leftist who decided to like have a go at me over, but like, he's going on about how like, the problem we get of this actually was, we need to build more housing, and like, it's, you racist people, like, it's not about immigration and so on. Oh, I know what it is. It was when I was reposting Chris Bernay's uh, article talking about these like just disgusting posters that the Canadian government has been paying to put up all over Toronto, just like defaming white people. It's been just awful. But so he was going out and he's like writing these text walls in the replies, explaining like what we actually have to do to like build enough housing to bring all the immigrants in. And I was just like, I'm not like, first of all, I'm not reading all that. Like second, like I know what you're doing here, and like no, like they need to be sent home.
Right,
Like
nobody cares,
that's
dude. Shut up.
right.
Like
Nobody cares. And then like immediately, and I saw this. We're going a mile away. Like the moment that I was like, yeah, no, like the ethnic replacement of my people is not something I'm going to debate here. Like, and he's like, oh, like you did to the Native Americans. I was like, yeah, no, here we go. Yeah, exactly. So like, actually, like once I strip away like the economic like bullshit, like you're trying to snow me with, which we all know is nonsense now because the data is in, it doesn't work. And they immediately go to, well, actually, it's for immigration is to punish. It's like, yeah, no, I see exactly, and like we all see it, right? So there's no point in interacting with them except, I guess, to make fun of them, like to morally shame them for like the disgusting human beings that they are.
right.
And there's one thing that I've been doing a lot the last several months. If people try to like, pull the anti-racism thing, and I'm like, oh yeah, so yeah, you support little girls in England getting raped.
Right.
Like there's a direct line between what you're saying and a bunch of little working class white girls getting raped by accidents. So
This stuff.
like do get off your moral high horse. Like you people are foul. Like
Yeah, this stuff.
oh
This stuff is actually useful for me to see, simply because it took a while. I live in a small rural town, right? And I finally ran into that liberal kid. Finally.
mm, a
And
Hicklip.
yeah, and we had a conversation last week about stuff, and we got onto the topic of Russia. And he started talking about how Georgia, the country, is European. And I was like, no, it's not. It's
What?
part of
No,
Asia.
it's not.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
absolutely not European.
right.
Like in no way, shape. And he's like, well, show me. How do you know that? And I was like,
What?
we're looking at a map of Europe, man. It's right there. Like it
It's
broke my
there in the
brain.
middle of Asia. Like,
Yeah, it's over
it's
there.
central. It's literally Central Asia.
Yeah, these words matter. Anyway, it broke my brain. Like I've been thinking about it for the past 2 weeks. And part of it is that, me and my work colleague have kind of been poking at him a little bit. And today we were discussing being antisocial. And him and I are both dancing around him where it's like, well, antisocial isn't just not talking to people. Sometimes it's talking to people so much you never shut the fuck up. And that actually drives people away from you. And he's like looking at us and we're like, all right, get to class, But it's
is,
the
is this a
kids.
student or like
Yeah,
one
it's
of
a
the
student.
teachers?
It's a
Okay,
student. It's a
okay,
student. It's a freshman.
right.
Now, this look, when I'm thinking about it, this kid, he lives in my town. Shit hits the fan. I'm in the foxhole with him. That's it. He lives in my town. All right. He lives here.
Of
He's
course,
done. And
people could have retarded opinions without
of
like
course,
that. Yeah,
yes.
that's yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And engaging with the libtardian discourse at least gives me the tools, or at least gives me a heads up to the kinds of things that a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old might think. And then I can try to figure out how to maybe push him back and nudge him back towards reality. Thankfully, he gets really into Roman history, and I insisted that he
Mm.
come by and read my copy of Gibson's Decline of the Roman Empire. So, like, I'm hoping I'll be able, like, just, dude, whatever you think is fine. However you think about the world is fine, but make sure you're actually thinking about it and not just
I always re-
repeating the
I always
memes.
recommend Plutarch. I always recommend
Yeah,
Plutarch. Like,
yeah.
give him maybe not the whole thing. I mean, like it's like what, like 700,000 words. It's a bit of a doorstep.
Nah,
Like,
fuck it. Just drop it on him.
but
But yeah,
like life of Alexander, life of Caesar.
yes.
Yeah, like
Maybe there's an in
yeah.
there to like break the just come on, kid. There's more to life than worrying about what happens on the other side of the world that you can't do anything about anyway.
Right, right.
No,
Yeah.
I'm convinced that like learning about history properly, like learning the actual narratives, what actually happened, um, the nuances of it, like this prevents retardation, like in almost all cases,
Hmm.
because like it once like you're, I mean, to a large degree, liberalism is just the absence of reality. So
The
like if
absence
you
of
can
what? Sorry,
reacquaint
it broke up
someone,
there. It broke up there. The absence of
uh,
what?
reality.
Ah, yes. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So I mean, if you can reacquaint, especially a young and impressionable mind like that, with reality, like like he'll grow out of it basically.
It's not calcified by any stretch of the
Hmm.
Right,
imagination.
right.
Not at all.
That's the
Mm.
thing. That's why it's important to be able to, like so much of, these 20th century ideas are fantasies and just delusions that are a product of a wealthy society with too much time on its hands, And
Yeah, we don't
when
have anything better to do.
right. In a way, travel dispels a lot of stupidity, because if
Mm.
you're
Yes.
if you're a young middle class man or a woman, and you have these fantasies about the world, and the number one way to dispel all kinds of liberal nonsense in your brain is doing some travel. And I'm not talking about like travel to, tourist destinations, even maybe some tourist destinations, but travel to places that we fetishize or fantasize about, and you are experienced to people living in different countries with completely different mindsets that aren't um, part of the world you know neoliberal kind of mindset. And people end up shocked, by like, whoa, that's how people think here, or like, that's how they treat animals, or that's how they treat each other, and that's how they see us, or and that's the number one
Yeah.
way. The more traveled a person is, the big joke used to be that like conservative people are just dumb yokels living in their yokel-ass backwoods. In reality is the more you travel, the more the more right-wing you become, for the most part, in a different
I
way
remember like
than
one of the it's completely true. I mean, like the first country that I lived abroad was Japan. So one of the fetishized countries. And shortly after arriving there, I spent a week working at a summer camp. This thing they call like a Tom Sawyer camp, giving them the American cultural experience, right? And so they had like English speaking counselors, and then and we were just basically just dancing monkeys. And then there was the Japanese counselors who actually kind of did everything. One of the activities they had for the kids, we're talking about little kids, like these like 5, 8-year-old kids, right? One of the activities they had for them was fishing. The counselors would release a bunch of fish, into a stream, and the kids would kind of like run in, like wade into the stream and catch the fish with their hands and bring it back to the counselors, and the counselors would handle the fish. And at a certain point, I walked over to this barrel that they were throwing all of the fish in, and I saw all like I don't know, like 100 fish in there, flopping around. They'd all been gutted, but they were all still alive. And I just had this moment of like existential horror at what I was seeing. Because, like, when we go fishing, you catch a fish, what's the first thing you do? You kill it
Right.
before you do anything else, right? Like, you break its neck, you smash its head, whatever you have to do, you kill it. Then you gut it, then you don't like leave it there to suffer, you know? Um, and they just were just casually leaving these sentient beings to like in like literally gutted, like in the most agonizing state possible to die of, I don't know, blood loss or something. And I couldn't wrap my head around that level of callousness. And I was like, wow, like, and like, I love the Japanese like, to death. Like, they're some of my favorite people, but like, this terrified me actually. And
Right.
and then like I immediately thought of like all those stories about the things the Japanese did during World War II, um, and I was like, yeah, these people do not think the way that we think. Like, it's completely, there's an alien thought process there. And then
Absolutely.
like and then like all of the other experiences I had in like the 3 years that I was there, like overwhelmingly they were positive experiences, but it just kind of continuously reinforced this like understanding that uh, you know, we can communicate, we can get along. It's really not an issue with the Japanese. But like the way they think is so profoundly alien, like not in a bad way, but it's very, very different. Uh,
Absolutely.
and
I had
then
the same
yeah,
exact experience in Japan. I had the same exact realization where, you get to Japan and, specifically in Tokyo, most people speak English. It's, if you close your eyes and, squint, you can pretend that you're like in Times Square, because it's the same stuff you find anywhere, give or take some decorations, right? But then you start interacting with the people, you become friends with them, and you start realizing that their mindset is completely, it's like their baseline, their operating system is so alien because it's not really founded on the Western, like kind of Christian backbone, that's missing completely. So they have very different like baseline assumptions about a lot of things that we take for granted in a Western country like the United States or in Europe. You can go you can go to Tokyo and feel a lot more alienated there culturally than you do in a very like foreign and alien Eastern European country where you feel at home because they have the same baseline assumptions almost. And it's really interesting. Would you say that compared to like Belgrade, for example, like you probably felt more at home in Belgrade than you did in Tokyo, even though Tokyo might be cleaner, nicer, even friendlier than the people in Belgrade. Um, there's like this baseline difference, and you really see it when it comes to sexual interaction between people in Japan, like dating and that kind of stuff. There's a very different like baseline assumption.
yes, absolutely. Even the way they communicate, they have this. It took me actually a couple of years to even notice that they did this because it's so alien. Europeans just don't do it, and we can't communicate in this fashion, but they do it all the time instinctively, and they have a word for it, which I can't remember what the word is. But basically, like they communicate using negative space.
Right.
So what is not said is as important as what is said. Uh, and it's not like an either or thing. Like there's meaning at both levels, and everything they say has meaning at both levels. And they're all constantly picking up on the meaning inside the negative space. So there's this like invisible conversation happening around you when you're with a group of them. So, you'll be hanging out with a group and the discussion is something like, where are we going to go for dinner? Right. and then suddenly somehow the group arrives at this like universal consensus and the place to go, and but you have no idea of how the actual words that were spoken somehow like resolved to like this
Right, right,
conclusion
absolutely. You know,
because there is this like invisible conversation that's happening. When I found out about this, I was kind of horrified actually because it was like, oh, because my Japanese was by that point getting pretty fluent, and then I realized like I will never actually speak Japanese
right,
because like it doesn't matter how good my command of the grammar gets, it doesn't matter how many kanji I can read, I will never be able to do this negative space communication.
right.
However, I got my revenge on them by teaching my students about sarcasm because which is kind of like a white. This is like a white equivalent of that, right? Because
Yeah.
like they have no conception of sarcasm at all in Japanese culture. Like the idea that you would say something which is the opposite of what you actually mean, that you would do this as a joke, that you do this all the time. Like when I would like they'd be like, oh, how often do white people like use sarcasm? And I'd be like, about half of what we say roughly is sarcastic, as a rule. And they're like, oh, how do we tell? I'm like, well, sometimes you can tell by tone of voice. That's not really it's not a firm guide, like a lot of times contextual, and like and the look of horror on their faces as they realize that like half of everything they'd ever heard white people say was the precise opposite of what they thought it meant.
There's
Right.
a glint in the eye that you see. Don't worry about it.
Well, so an interesting example, I'm going to simplify it for listeners not familiar with, in Japanese culture, is you tend to have Americans or Europeans who we tend to be very forward people, right? We are very
Yes.
honest and forward people, and we tend to mean what we say, even with sarcasm, right? We tend to, when we're
Hmm.
being serious and we ask a question, we really mean it, right? In Japan, culturally, they do basically, I don't know what the best way to describe it. It's like not a lying, but a polite fibbing, right? So
It's an indirectness,
right, it's an
right? We're like
indirectness. They
we're
speak in
like they'll
circles.
yeah, as a way of because it's impolite to directly say something. It's impolite to directly criticize you for something, right?
Right.
Like
So they have a
so they try
code.
to yeah,
So
yeah.
a good example is often, Americans I met a lot of French guys when I was in Tokyo because they love the French over there. Um, did you meet a lot of French people? Because there's French people everywhere.
Yeah,
Um,
I met a few. I met a few. Yeah.
and Australians, and I've
Oh,
noticed
so
that
many Aussies. Oh my God.
a lot of the males when they're dating Japanese women or they're starting to date Japanese women usually hit this wall when they're new to Japan, which they, especially if they're not very uh, emotionally intuitive, they hit a wall
Hmm.
where they'll go out on a date with a girl, and then they meet up with her like a week later, and they'll go, "Hey, do you want to go out tomorrow to the movies, or do you want to go out to the bar?" All right, and the Japanese girl will say, no, I can't. I have to go with my family, right? And what the Japanese girl is actually telling them is, no, I don't want to go out with you. No, thank you. I'm not interested. Don't
Right,
ask me again, right?
right,
She just
right.
did it in a very nice way to she let you down to save face, right? And the issue comes in
Hmm.
when that same guy goes out to the bar the next night and sees the girl, like, with a group of other people out. And they're like, why the fuck like are you like out, you told me you're gonna be hanging out with your grandmother or something, and because they don't realize that it's understood that they were just
Hmm.
letting them down nicely. They're never gonna say, no, I don't want to date you, they're gonna say, oh, I can't, my grandma is 100 years old and I gotta make rice for her for the next 6 months. You know what I mean? That's gonna be their excuse. But everybody that understands the culture knows that what she just said is, no, dude, I don't want to go out with you at
But
all.
there's nuance there. So it
Right.
depends on like the nature of the excuse that she gives you. So like I remember one time I asked a girl out and like and she was like, oh, like I can't, I'm doing laundry. And I was like, and I totally thought that it was exactly what you just described. And she was just like, saying no, but doing it politely. I wasn't, that blind, right? And I was like, ah, damn, And then like, one of my friends who understood the culture a little bit more, and he was like, no, man, like that's her way in this case of saying, ask me harder, basically. So like be a little bit more persistent or something. So I was like, okay. So then I tried again, and she was like, okay. And I was like, all
Yeah,
right.
my laundry's dry now,
Like,
but no, it's exactly that. It's like they speak in circles and codes and stuff that are very alien if you're not completely immersed in that
the
culture.
the
And
weirdest. And I don't know how like family friendly this podcast is, but
yeah,
they're what they say during sex, like it's
I don't
it's
even.
it's all the yeah, yeah, no, it's all just the opposite of what you would expect girls to say. Like,
Well, that's why
yeah.
I like out of all the movies about Japan and stuff, I always like my favorite one is Lost in Translation with the Bill Murray
Mm,
because that one captures the feeling of alienation that like a American guy or Americans feel when they're kind of alone and immersed in that world. You're like, oh, I really don't understand what the hell is going on around me whatsoever.
it's
And
it's
The
just
hooker scene is very, very uncomfortably accurate. I feel
right.
like watching it, imagining myself as Bill Murray. It's just, oh God,
it's
no, just,
just it's complete disorientation. Like
Right.
yeah,
like
yeah.
nothing makes sense. Like it took me a couple of weeks to realize that they drove on the opposite side of the road because everything is just so different that like a little thing like that, like it didn't really stand out. Whereas if I go to like the United Kingdom, those little differences pop out immediately, right? Because it's otherwise so similar. So like you're going to the UK, there's this kind of uncanny valley, like bizarro world aspect to it. Through this kind of through the looking glass feeling to visiting England, whereas like visiting Japan, that's like going to an alien planet.
It is. It
Like
is.
yeah.
I tried driving from like downtown Tokyo to the airport to Narita one time. That was a disaster of like immense proportions. I was like, I got lost. I was like, I cannot read any of the freaking signs, and their highways are so difficult to drive on. Like their regular streets are fine, but they're like like they don't have exits on their freeways. They just go on forever. And you miss an exit, you're on it for like 10 kilometers, like
Oh my God.
and you're like, and they're all toll roads, and you're like, you get lost and you end up paying like $200, in like fines, and you're like, oh
Oh
my
my
God, I
God.
don't know where the hell I'm going. You can't see
This is
anything.
probably why like most Japanese people don't even own a car.
Yeah, because it's
Like if
impossible to
they
drive over there.
yeah, the train system is so excellent in Tokyo that you don't need a car actually. And if you want to do like a day trip, like out to go skiing or something, you just rent a car.
Well, you know what you do? You rent a car and you actually mail your equipment. They have this like little like UPS type thing called Black Cat, and it's got a little black
Oh
cat on
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
It's super cheap too.
it's super cheap. You like my
Yeah.
friends used to do it too. They taught me how to do it. They're like, okay, you take all your snowboards and you take it to the Black Cat like store, and you do it. You
Hmm.
send it in the morning, and then you hop on a train. You drive. Ride the train up to like Sapporo or wherever, and your stuff's there by the afternoon, and you go snowboarding. And it's like,
Which for the listeners, like you don't even need to go to like a special store to use the Black Cat system. You can like literally just walk into any convenience store, not even like a specific chain, just like any convenience store, and they'll handle it there.
right.
Like, and there's convenience stores on practically every corner. Like, it's one of the amazing things about Tokyo is like in terms of the quality of life is just like as alienating and disorienting as the cultural aspects can be from a purely physical level, it is probably one of the easiest environments to live in as a human being on the planet. Like it's just everything is maximally convenient
Right.
and high quality and just like you know yeah like I use Black Cat to like mail myself like two large boxes full of manga that I purchased while I was living there. Um, and it was like I like mailing all of it back to myself from Canada was like $70. Like it
Right.
was like
It's wild, right?
super
How
cheap.
cheap
Like
some
I
things
couldn't
are.
believe it.
You know what's
Yeah,
interesting about
yeah,
Japan that kind of struck me as really weird. In one way, Tokyo and Japan itself is a very high tech country, but in other ways, it is very lo-fi. It's very low tech. Like any type of administrative,
cash.
they don't use. There's not one computer in the whole country. I don't know. You never see a computer anywhere. It's all like they do everything on cell phones but all their administrative anything like try like buying a car in that country you have to or renting a place you have to take a stack of like 100 million yen in your pocket to
Yes,
pay for rent like they only take cash, right?
yes,
And everything you go to any
yes.
clerk office and in order to do anything you have to go to like 7 different clerk offices and they all have drawers filled with stamps and these guys love fucking stamps for some reason, right? And they're stamping all this shit constantly. You know what I'm talking about? Like just stamping stuff. You're like, you go
Yeah,
bills, they're stamping it 7 stamps. They have like stamps for everything, and you're like, oh my God, where do you get all these stamps? You know, like it's like
yeah. And then they're like their equivalent to the signature is this thing they call a honko, which is a little stamp you put into like uh, it's got the kanji for your name on it, right? And it goes like this little circle on the form, and you buy the honko at like a store. Like there's no security feature there really. So like how you tie a honko to like a person, I'm not totally sure. Then of course, like you can't do that as a foreigner because there are no kanji for your name. So you just have to like write your signature like in like tiny, tiny, tiny little characters inside the little circle, like where because there's no signature box.
it's
The
wild.
the cash thing was insane because like so you have to go to an ATM. Obviously, they're not that backwards. But the ATMs all close at like 11 p.m. because there's some law that bank needs to be guarded by like a physical guard. Like a human being has to be there guarding a bank. Um, and they're just not going to have like a security guard there at 3 o'clock in the morning. So like the banks just all close their ATMs at like 11 p.m. And if you have not taken out cash before then, like well, yeah, you're not going to be able to pay for anything then. So
Right, but they also get paid on their like Suica cards too, which are like train cards. It's like super weird. Or their Passmo cards or whatever for their trains. You get these cards at Vista, right? You go to these like
Yeah.
ATM looking things, right? And they're the train stations, and there's two of them.
mhm.
There's two of them. There's one called a Suica and one called a Passmo, and one is like a private train company, and the other one is the federal train company, right? The
Yeah,
green
Japan
line or something,
Rail. Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
you put your name in the ATM and you like write your name or whatever. It's like an ATM thing, and a little fucking card comes out, right? And that card is like a credit card, a debit card, a you can buy everything with it, and you put money on it. It works like a charge debit card, like a prepaid charge card, but they can actually get their paychecks put onto those cards. It's like the
That's
craziest thing.
wild.
And they use it at the
So
convenience
it's
stores.
either these cards or cash.
Right, right,
There
right.
you go.
It's like
You
Yeah,
know,
but they've really expanded that. So when I was there, it was like that was just for the trains. Although we were still like we would often still just use the paper train tickets you can get at the machine. We're like, uh, you find the station you want to go to, and it tells you like the fare, so you pay that amount and get the ticket. And then if it's the ticket's not the right amount, uh, then you just have to pay the difference before leaving the station. But then that opened it up to a degree of anti-social abuse by the gaijin because we figured out, and I am ashamed to say that I did do this myself a couple of times, that if you had to go a really long distance, uh, all you had to, and you want to do it for cheap, all you had to do was lose your ticket along the way. So you just when you enter the system, you get like the cheapest ticket you could for like one station over, and then like an hour later at your destination on the other side of Tokyo, you feel like, oh, I lost my ticket, and like the officer would kind of like roll his eyes at you in the Japanese way because he knows exactly what's going on. He's like, okay, where'd you come from? And you tell him like one station before your destination. So again, it's the lowest possible price.
Right.
I knew a guy who got from Tokyo to Osaka doing that, riding on local trains the whole way.
Oh,
It
geez.
took him like, yeah, I know, it took him like 3 days.
Right. You
Which
can't
like,
do that
he was
anymore.
like, but he's like, I did it for 300 yen. And I was like, yeah, but it took you 3 days, dude. Like, you should have like, honestly, like just paid $100, take the Shinkansen, what's wrong with you?
Right, exactly. You can't do that anymore because now everything is on these Suica cards, and I mean everything is on them, right? Like your 7-Eleven, all your soda coffee machines and stuff are all use those
You know
cards.
what's so funny about that? What's so funny about it? Did they bring those cards out and do all of those changes simply in order to defeat an antisocial behavior by foreigners?
Yeah,
Probably.
That's the
Yeah,
most
probably.
Japanese thing
That's
I've ever heard in my
probably,
life.
yeah, no, that would not surprise me. No, I mean, like there's a little bit of that going on in Japanese society. So like, drug laws, very similar. So like, uh, magic mushrooms were legal for the longest time in Japan because Japanese people just didn't even ever do them. So you could just like walk into a store
Yeah.
and buy psilocybin mushrooms. And then there was, one incident too many of, American soldiers having a little bit of too much fun and causing a bit of mayhem. And the Japanese were just like, okay, that's illegal now. And like they did this for like several other like party drugs and like research chemicals and such. So like all of the phenethylamines and tryptamines, you still buy those in the stores there as well. Um, None of it because of Japanese behavior. It was pretty much all American GIs.
Yeah, a
Amazing.
lot of that stuff is like interesting because they are like adjusting to being more international. Um, but
Hmm.
and honestly, when you go outside of Tokyo, you're in Japan. In Tokyo, almost
Oh yeah.
everybody speaks English. But once you go like even like south of Tokyo into like Yokohama and stuff, you're like, there's nothing in English. You're completely out in like on Mars, basically. You're like in a foreign land,
Hmm.
and it
Yeah,
can
the,
get pretty
the, the
difficult.
menus are not going to have any English translation on them, so you just got to like look at the pictures and be like, well, that looks tasty. I'll have that.
Yeah, well, and of course they have that weird cultural thing of like the miniature models of all the food, which is so weird. But like
Yes,
I like it.
yes,
Do you know what we're talking about, Fisto?
I think so. I think I've seen this.
Yeah, they're
yeah.
Explain for the
They're like
folks at home.
window
Explain for the folks
displays with
scoring at
these
home.
like
so they make
windows. Just
their window displays and stuff in a lot of restaurants, especially more traditional restaurants, and even really newer restaurants, is they are really into making these tiny, lifelike, hyper realistic, like copies of the food that the restaurant is serving, right? They actually have like artists
yes.
that they hired to do this for individual restaurants. So instead of like seeing a picture of like the dish you're going to order, you see this like lifelike model, like made out of like wax and plastic and shit. And that's what's going to be
Hmm.
on display. And 99.9% of the time, what you order looks identical to the damn thing. You know what I
Exactly.
mean? You're like, oh, that's like when you
It
order a
it makes a lot of sense for them to do that because like
right,
a
it
lot of
does.
times you look at the menu, and like everything's written in kanji, but like maybe like the kanji for a certain specific dish might be like super obscure, right? So like a lot of this is sort of downstream of just how absurdly complicated their alphabet is. It's like literacy is not like a uh not a trivial accomplishment in Japanese culture, actually.
Right.
Um, and like it's this is why you watch Japanese television, everything is subtitled in Japanese, right? Not like just foreign shows, like Japanese shows are subtitled in Japanese, not like little furigana like written over some of the more obscure kanji, because it's sort of like understood like a lot of the audience, like if you're not like a college graduate, like you might only understand like 2,000 kanji, like assuming that you were a good high school student. If you were terrible high school student, maybe you only understood like 1,000 kanji. So which means
Right.
like huge parts of the alphabet are just completely opaque to you.
Not
So
to
they
mention
kind
that they
of
have three alphabets
yes, exactly.
and they
Right.
combine them right? They're
I
not three
know. Yes.
individual alphabets. There's three separate alphabets that they combine in the same word sometimes. They have kanji, katakana, and what's the last one?
Hiragana.
Hiragana, right? And they have
Yeah.
different
And
purposes.
the hiragana is used for writing Japanese words. For like the grammatical parts of the words, I guess you would say.
Right.
And then like the kanji is used for sort of nouns, verbs, like
Yeah,
the
place
roots
names,
of
stuff like that.
verbs. It's like right. So like if you see like the Japanese word for read, for example, like yomu, like you'll have like the kanji for read will be like the first character, and then there'll be the hiragana for the sound mu after that. And then if you like sort of change the verb to indicate like past tense or present perfect or whatever, like will like sort of like change from mu to like whatever the other form is. And then like the katakana is used for foreign words and for emphasis. So it's basically used in the same way as italics are used in English. They just have an entire alphabet,
Right. And
for
there's like a
like that
phonetic
specific
element
purpose.
to it also.
Yes, so the katakana and the hiragana are both phonetic. They're
Right.
actually pretty easy to learn. That's the kanji, that's the Chinese characters. That's where, because like the kanji, like you'll have not only do you have like thousands of characters, but like each character will have like multiple pronunciations. So there's like a pronunciation if it's part of a verb. There's a pronunciation if it's a standalone symbol. There's a pronunciation if it's a part of a compound word and a noun or something like that. And they're
Right.
all different pronunciations.
And it's really interesting because you can really understand how culture is kind of like, in a way, influenced by language, and you see that in their poetry and in their fiction a lot. You
Mm,
you kind of understand why their visual media like manga and stuff is popular because freaking language is complicated. You look at
mhm.
you look at a book like The Wind Up Bird, right? And it's like 6 volumes in Japanese and only like one in English, because it's like the complexity of the writing is so much more. There's just a lot more characters to use to kind of, but you also have a very punctual, like almost poetic, minimalist kind of way of speaking or communicating with based on because of the like pictogram quality of the language. That's really interesting. It's a
Yes.
it's a very interesting alien place, and I loved living there.
I
Um,
wonder I wonder what the Japanese version of this conversation looks like. Like the guys who spent tons of time in America. I mean,
they're
it's
probably
obviously
like,
not going to be similar, but the reason I say that is just I'm listening to you guys talk about this, and it strikes me like I mean I don't know if I'll ever get to Japan. I'm certainly not going to spend a significant amount of time there. But like this stuff is fucking incredible, man. This stuff is
right.
great,
So,
and like to
so the
tie it
interesting
all.
thing,
Yeah, go ahead,
the
go
really
ahead.
interesting thing, really, to me, the really interesting thing is the relationship between the Japanese and Europeans.
Yeah,
That seems to me rather unique in the world is the mutual fascination.
Yes.
Um,
yeah,
They're all weebs
so
for Europe. They're all Francophiles like files where they
yes, they don't feel that way about Africa or about the other parts of Asia or about the Middle East. Like they're just kind of not as interested, but they look at Europe and they're like fascinated by it, right? And similarly, like when Europeans discovered Japan, there was this almost immediate fascination with the place that you did not see to the same degree with any of the other, I mean, we explored the entire world, right? And I've often thought of this, and this might be the most racist thing I say in this podcast, that, we explored the entire planet looking for an other that we could really talk to. And we didn't really find any, we mostly found kind of savages and barbarians. We found people who were below us culturally and frankly cognitive. And then we ran into the Japanese and we were like, oh, wait, like, these people are actually our equals. Like they're completely alien. They see the world in a completely different fashion. They've got a completely distinct history, like historical development. Um, but at the level of just like cultural sophistication and cognitive depth, like there was this instinctive understanding that like
Mm.
they were at the same level as the Europeans. And the Japanese had the same sort of realization when they had sort of like full European contact. They were like,
Right.
wait, like, these aren't like the barbarians that were surrounded by in the rest of Asia. Um, these people are actually highly sophisticated despite being uncouth barbarians themselves, you know.
Right. Which is uncouth barbarian is technically the translation of the word gaijin, though. So it's interesting.
It's outside person technically. I always find it kind of funny that like the polite version is just slightly longer. It's gaikokujin, which is outside country person. Um, and I
Outside
would,
country person. I love it.
yeah, it's like somehow that does that. That's like it's longer, so it's more polite, which is a very Japanese way of thinking about things. But it'd be funny sometimes because you'd be talking with a Japanese person and like they'd be like say something about the guy, and they do like stop themselves and be like kokujin.
Yeah. You know,
And
it's
we'd all
interesting
just
too.
laugh because the gaijin living in Tokyo, you know, we sort of adopted that word as our own word. You
Right,
know,
right. Everyone's
like
like
it was,
gaijin pride. Everybody that lives out
yeah,
there is like
yeah,
embraces it, you
exactly,
know?
exactly. Well, because like because you actually, as a gaijin in Tokyo, you actually do fulfill a role. It's one of the interesting things about kind of the evolution of Tokyo, of Japanese culture in Tokyo, is that they've sort of learned, even in their corporate culture, right? Like as the Japanese equivalent or whatever of DEI, is that they actually, a lot of the companies now will have like a set aside position for like the American, right? And it's actually like, it's not like, oh, like we need to be diverse for its own sake or whatever. It's not about that at all. They simply realize that culturally, Americans are really useful because in Japanese culture, you don't ever contradict the boss, even if the boss's idea is catastrophically bad and everyone knows it. You can't tell him that, right? Um, which can, lead to bad consequences sometimes. But if you have that one white guy there, like he doesn't partake in this like you know this aspect of your culture, so he's totally at liberty to be like, actually, that's a bad idea. Like we can't do that. It's like literally his
Right.
role is to be the outspoken sanity checker.
It's like the
Um,
jester, basically.
it is kind of similar to that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's
That's my
actually,
in,
it's.
baby. That's my in. Just go to Japan, work for some big company, and just call the boss a retard every so often.
Well,
Fucking done. Perfect. Perfect.
I think
Thank you,
so.
gentlemen.
From talking to Japanese about Americans, and especially Japanese that have traveled to the United States. One interesting little note, because I was actually talking about this with a coworker today, is that you meet Japanese people, and they're like, "Oh, I've never been to the United States," and then like they have pictures of themselves on vacation in Hawaii, but for some reason they never consider Hawaii part of the United States. It's like I don't know if you ever
It's
encountered
something.
that.
No, but that's something the Hawaiians certainly agree with. I suspect that's probably for cultural reasons
Yeah.
because the Japanese have had like such a presence in Hawaii for such a
Right.
long time that they sort of on the down low, like they sort of consider that to be sort of part of Japan,
Yeah, they
actually.
do. They do. It's funny because they're like, "Oh, I've never been to the U.S." I'm like, "Wait a second. There's a picture of you in Honolulu from 6 months ago, Yuki." And they're like, "Oh, oh yeah, I guess I have been to the U.S." So it's really funny like they do that. But the ones that go to like the mainland and stuff, they're. I mean, I think one of the things they say about us is that we tend to be very direct. That's one thing that
Uh-huh,
we're loud and direct.
uh-huh,
Um,
uh-huh.
they're kind of shocked by the levels of like crime and not safety. I mean, look, listen, in Japan, my wife could go hiking at 2 in the morning through the mountains with like one female friend, and she wasn't gonna
Yeah.
get raped or murdered.
Uh-huh.
And even like the landscape itself is not very hostile. There's no like crazy, except in like the northern areas where there's bears and stuff. There's no like crazy like mountain lions like in like California or alligators
No,
like
because they're the British of Asia, right? I mean, the same way the British just like exterminated everything dangerous on Britain. I should say the English, actually. The Japanese like if there ever were any dangerous animals in the archipelago, like they're long gone.
Yeah. And the most annoying animal in Japan is all the mama san's stupid ass like Akita, not Akitas, little like Shiba Inu dogs that they carry
Oh
around,
God.
It-
Or the ones that they push around in
yeah.
strollers in baby clothes.
They look like
Yeah,
little
yeah.
little cockapoos and stuff, like little annoying. Like my wife used to call them like the fried chicken dogs because they look like a piece of fried chicken, like in their little strollers. And they're just so like they like baby these dogs, but not like they don't train them. They just like let them like act completely retarded the whole time. So like Shiba Inus are like the worst dog on the planet. If you ever want a dog, do not get a Shiba Inu because they're horrible dogs. Like they're
I am convinced that the Asians do not actually understand the point of dogs.
no, I not at all, right? Like
Like I think, yeah. Like I mean, it happened. I mean, the domestication happened in Siberia. Uh, Very obviously, the ancestors of Europeans, I suspect, probably even came in through like the Proto-Europeans or something. So like we're the ones who sort of evolved all of the neurological circuits for like empathizing with dogs, and through that the capability to like empathize with like other animals. And so we just assume that that's a thing humans do, but like that's actually not true. Like most humans do not have that level of ability to like
no.
empathize with other animals. Uh, and like with dogs, especially, it's like you don't have to really tell a European how to like interact with a dog. It's kind of instinct. And then the Asians like see that and they're like, oh, well, white people are high status, and having a dog is a high status white thing to do. So we'll do that because it's high status. They just kind of adopted it as a
It's
profession.
absolutely a status thing with dogs with them, and it's like, and they're just like wild and completely useless animals, And then you'll go to Yoyogi Park, and some people will have like pit bulls and stuff, and you're like, "What the hell did you get a pit bull
Oh
in
fuck.
Tokyo?"
Oh God. Oh God. Oh no.
You know,
I heard this one story about like I don't know if this is true or not. This could be completely apocryphal. I've never actually bothered checking to see if this actually happened, but it seems very believable to me. Like some Japanese couple is hiking in the Canadian Rockies, and they come across a grizzly bear, which I guess I don't know. The bear was not in a mood to be particularly active, so it was not being aggressive, which they took as permission to start like taking pictures of it, and like it didn't do anything. So they're like, okay, and then they have a baby with them, and then they're like, oh, we're gonna get a picture of the baby with the bear, and then once they put the baby next to the bear, of course the bear was like, well, that's a little close, so it killed the baby because it's a grizzly bear. Like, but like no instincts for dealing with animals
Yeah.
at all.
right,
Like they
Guys, you gave the bear a snack.
right. Well, but
What
that
were you
yes.
thinking?
that goes into dealing with foreigners too. There's an element of Japanese culture that has no instinct for. They have a hard time, I think, when they travel because of that. They have a hard time in
Mm,
societies very different because they don't rip each other off. They don't do any of that stuff. It's like very
yeah.
alien to them to like, they would. So they fetishize France, right? Like they have a very hard, like there's like basically Japanese version of weebs, but they're like for France, right? If you go to Tokyo,
For
Freeze.
Paris
but
We'll
not
call
for
them freeze.
real Paris.
specifically.
Not for real
Yeah.
Paris. For like some weird Amelie
N-
1920.
1920s. Yes, exactly.
They have
Right.
like bakeries with like Francis, like Carmelite nun like outfits and stuff, and like it's just like it's
The first time I went to Akihabara after like I've been in the country maybe like I don't know a few weeks at that point, and so Akihabara, that's
it's like the
that's sort of the
anime
otaku
porn district, yeah.
anime, right? Yeah, which I knew it was like the otaku thing. I didn't realize it was a porn district. But yeah, I walked around for a bit. And I looked at the stuff. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then I was like, I'd like to get a coffee. So went into the first coffee shop I find, and all these girls in like French maid uniforms are like working there. And I was like, oh, that's weird. And I was only like after that I found that this was like some kind of like fetish that they have. And I was like, oh god, like
Yeah, they do. Everything is like Kiki's Delivery Service, like this like weird pseudo European French thing, and it's like they have like bakeries and they have like little like I don't know, like their little chocolate shops that are, one of the best
Hmm.
Oktoberfest like festival and parties I've ever been to was actually in Tokyo. So,
In
it's
Tokyo. Yeah, no, totally.
yeah,
Yeah.
they had
No,
like a polka bands and stuff.
they perfect things, right? So like, black Nicka whiskey is like one of the best whiskeys I've
It
ever
is.
had,
It's like $8 at the
right?
store.
Yeah.
Like
Like,
when we moved over here,
but yeah, no, so
we bought a
like,
bunch of it over at we bought a bunch of it at like 7-Eleven because it's such a great whiskey for like no price. I actually found some in Little
yeah.
Tokyo in Los Angeles, and it was like
Oh
selling
wow.
for like $100, and I was like, "What? That's like $8 whiskey over at in freaking Japan."
Oh yeah, no, these exactly. We'd like go down to like the 7-Eleven and like get a bottle of that, bring it back to the apartment, spend the evening playing like Tekken and like Soul Calibur and like just like getting fucking wasted. It was great.
Dude, I used to love
Um, but
those highball tall cans they sold, like the Suntory highball, like just can, and just pour that over ice, throw a lemon in there, and it's like the best drink. You can get like 10 of them for like eight
mm,
bucks, and you're just drunk. All right, man. Hey, we gotta call it a night. Like usual, we went way over our scheduled time, and we didn't talk about half the stuff. We'd even mentioned the Canadian election, but so I'm gonna do a one quick mention of this, right? As an
right.
American, I don't even think about you guys.
Yeah, that's standard.
Like,
It's actually the fun, as a Canadian, the funniest thing about the last few months has, and somewhat unsettling, I must say, has been like this the sudden interest on the part of the American right in Canada. And like, so, I've done like a couple podcast appearances where people are like, hey, can you come and explain Canada to me? And like, you see a lot of discourse, on X about Canada, and what to do about it. And like, some of it's retarded, but like you expect that. But, but yeah, like all of a sudden, like, America's interested in Canada. No good can come from this, I'm sure.
I was about to ask, do you kind of feel like the kid getting sat next to that bear?
I sort of feel like America's gearing itself up to deliver some freedom and democracy.
Yes, sir.
you
We
know,
got oil. We got freedom. Let's
because I
go.
was thinking about things to talk about, and we always pick on Lisa Kuznak about Canada and stuff whenever she comes on, but
Yeah,
I was like, "Wait, what? I was like, I don't really care. I don't really
yeah.
like. I just don't care. Like the extent of my
No, so
Canadian
so like
like experience.
there was like the nitty gritty of the Canadian election was like the most boring thing as usual in Canadian
Yeah, I
elections,
don't
right? I mean,
even
like
think about Canada.
the big outcome is that after 4 or 5 years of a liberal government propped up by the NDP, we now have a liberal government propped up by the NDP.
Right. It's like,
Okay,
cool. All
yeah,
right. Canada's
right.
great. Enjoy. It's funny. The only time I ever like think of Canada is in California. For a while, it got really trendy for all our middle class tweakers and junkies and druggies to move to Vancouver instead of Portland. Like for a while, like Vancouver was like where I had a bunch of like kind of like
Why?
loserish,
Because it
like
was slightly cheaper in Vancouver. Was that the
They
reason?
I don't
shot
know
X
what it
Files
was,
there.
but like
That's why.
I have a
Because
few friends that moved over there,
like Vancouver is like fantastic. It might be the most expensive city in North
Yeah.
America. So yeah, I don't know why they would. I don't know, there's a lot of drug use in Vancouver,
That's probably
but
why they
it's
could just do drugs because like
also
Portland got
true.
filled up or something, and they're like, let's go over there. So that's kind of like my extent. I mean, I grew up with a French Canadian best friend, and she actually ended up, we grew up in Los Angeles, and she ended up moving to Quebec because she was French Canadian and spoke French and stuff. She got a job there for some company,
Logically enough.
Mm.
and she ended up kind of hating it and moving back to California after a few years. Like she was like, I don't like it. She's like, it sucks. It's cold. Like healthcare sucks. She ended up, she got married and she had kids and she's like, nope, I'm bringing them back to California. And
Mm.
I thought that was really interesting because she's kind of a shit lib, and she didn't like it. She thought it was like too, like she like waited.
So there has been a constant like going on for like well over a century, just sort of constant brain drain out of Canada into the
Yeah.
US every generation because the weather's better, the taxes are lower as a rule. There's invariably if you're ambitious. There's just more opportunity down in the States. Uh, and Canada just is this very sort of weirdly parochial, provincial, inward-looking place where like it's it's kind of the backwater, to be
Right.
honest. Like
Well,
yeah,
you know,
and it's yeah,
well, I wonder because, I grew up in Southern California. Now I live in South Carolina, which is also a southern state. And Fisto, he's in Florida. And, I always like when I think of neighbors, I never think about Canada or Canadians. I think of Mexicans, right? And Mexico holds a
mm,
very kind of a weird symbiotic relationship with the United States, especially the Southwest and California. Lots of food, lots of different culture exchange. We think of it's a foreign place and it's different and it's a different culture, but it's still a culture that's somewhat tied to American culture. And you just don't think about the way we think about Mexico, about Canada. Like actually,
no,
we
because
don't
you
think
don't
about
have
Canada
to.
at all.
You
Yeah,
don't you don't you yeah, because you don't have to, right? So like, or at least until recently, you didn't have to.
right,
So like Mexico is very obviously culturally different and very obviously racially distinct. It's something more of a problem that has to be, you've got this sort of like poor, corrupt narco state south of the border, and it's like kind of unstable and constantly threatening to kind of collapse in on itself. And it's just a constant headache. You've constantly got this problem with like poor Mexican campesinos like flooding across the border. It's been going on
right,
for like since like the 50s at least. Um, so it's just this constant pain in the ass, right? And of course, you can't give it a pain in the ass. Whereas
right,
Canada, historically, has been a orderly, peaceful, well-run country, predominantly settled by culturally very similar Anglo-Saxons, like who barely even have a detectable accent compared to Americans. So when you're interacting with a Canadian, like unless he tells you he's Canadian, you generally don't even know.
right,
Or
right.
maybe like a French Canadian, it would be obvious, but like yeah, it was Ontario or anywhere west of that, you'd have no idea. Um,
Yeah, I'm thinking back. I'm thinking back to growing up on Lake Erie, and Canada was, oh, it's those guys over there. And
yeah,
you go visit, and it's like visiting your cousin.
Right.
You're like, oh, hey,
yeah,
how you
yeah.
doing? Yeah, hey, man, what's going on? Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, the
Don't
only
be an
yeah, the
asshole.
only
You're
difference
visiting
is that
family.
you can drink a beer 2 years earlier.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah,
You know,
like so like
something I remember of Canada. My big memory is it's all that, and then it's the nature. We'd spend
sure,
vacations
yeah.
going north. Up on some. It's called the French River. But like
Mhm.
Canada, I will always remember because it was the first place I saw the Milky Way. It was like, holy
That was
shit, this is
first time
this
you got far enough away from the city lights
proper,
to
yeah, proper dark
yeah,
sky. It's
wow,
just, it
wow,
was, I could picture it in my mind, and it's just like, holy shit, this place is cool.
man. That's where
Yeah.
that's where I grew up. Like I grew up in the middle of a
Oh,
forest. Like just but like
nice.
since then like the city grew enough that like
Yeah.
when I would go back home like a few like I mean, my mom sold the place actually a few years ago that you know I would
Yeah,
go
no, this
back and
place,
like and there'd be that red glow on the horizon. I was just like,
yeah.
oh, so disappointing.
Yeah,
But
this place was 12 hours going north and then another 45 minutes by boat. So like there ain't
mhm.
no running water, nothing, just a little cabin in a shack on a rock somewhere. It's
Right.
pretty much
It,
perfect.
Yeah, but I've been writing a lot about Canada the last several months because it's becoming to me an increasingly interesting question because the country is
Yeah.
getting destabilized. There's every chance that Alberta might leave, try to join the U.S. perhaps, which will probably shatter the whole country if that happens. You know, this the sheer mismanagement of our I mean, you think your ruling class in the states is bad? Well, yeah, no. I think ours is actually more incompetent and more malign. Uh, and we've had this massive cultural shifts in a very short period of time, incredibly fast immigration. Like everything is kind of falling apart again. And like I think the US is starting to kind of like belatedly realize like, wait, like this nice, safe, well-run, orderly Anglo, like prosperous Anglo country to our north that we never had to think about because it just kind of ticked along nicely and didn't cause problems. Suddenly there's like fentanyl across the border in massive amounts. There's also money laundering happening, filling themselves up with like the dregs of India. Like, what is going on here? Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's wild.
bad things are going on in Canada.
But there's definitely an element of manufactured concern, for, at least from the American perspective, and I think it's created by the kind of progressive left that we're like, oh, all of a sudden we
Mm.
care about what Canadians say. It's like, bitch, nobody ever thought about them ever. You know what I mean? Like, let's be honest, guys. You know, like I know it's like no, but I mean, I guess we notice now. We're like, oh, well, they have opinions. It's like. Okay, cool.
Mhm.
Anyways, about
It
Mexico.
I,
strikes me. It
I,
strikes me
I,
that the
I, I'm sort of like thinking like, what would be like some of the interesting cultural consequences if, we do have like a political merger at some point in the next few years. Because like, whether that happens or not, this is probably the historical moment in which that has it's more likely now than it's been at any point in the last like, 200 years, basically. Uh, and then like, okay, what happens then? It's like, okay, so suddenly you're going to have all this attention on Canada, like especially as if annexation happens, then it's going to be like a big deal, right? It'll dominate headlines for a while probably, and there's also going to be like this discovery of like Canadian military history and how that interrelates with like American military history because there's huge parts of your own story that you guys don't tell, huge parts of our story that we don't tell, how all of this kind of relates to the British and the French, like the larger sort of like
yeah.
imperial picture, like how our countries came to be in the first place, right? And there actually would be this need to sort of establish some kind of like new binding national mythology that could unite the national mythologies of Canada and the US at the same historical moment that you actually have kind of a need for a new founding, if you will, because like the old mythologies are looking a little shaky, not everyone agrees on them. So I've kind of got this like picture in my head of like epic movies being made about like the 7 Years War uh and like and things like that in order to try and like bring everyone together.
In the
Um,
United States, we call it the French and Indian War,
right. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. But how much like Americans are not taught a lot about the French and Indian War is sort of
Not
my
like almost
impression.
none whatsoever. And it's actually
Yeah.
it's a fascinating war because it is really, it should be taught as the prequel to the American Revolution because everything in the
Yes.
American Revolution was a direct result of the French and Indian War. And
Even George Washington learned how to be a soldier
right,
in
he
the French
fought
and
in
Indian
it.
War, right?
Right.
Yep.
And the French and Indian War, Americans that don't know about it, go, it's the French fighting the Indians. No, no, no. It's the American colonists fighting the French and the Indians, right?
Yes.
That's what we call it. But there's an excellent, I believe, an excellent book on, I'll find it because I read it a few years ago. And yeah, it is really the building block of American colonialism, and it's where the American Revolution really started, if you really want to go back to like
Yeah.
cause and
And like
effect type stuff.
during that war, 'cause that was also an imperial war between the British and the French, right?
Right.
There was no distinction really at the time between the American colonists and the British. The American colonists were just like British who were born in America and didn't pay British taxes. Um, but like uh, that was when Quebec was conquered, right? Which is how Canada ultimately came to be, why we're saddled with the Quebecois. But then the conquest of Quebec and the other expenses of the war, but the conquest of Quebec was a big thing. Then suddenly the British had to find ways of sort of pacifying the Quebecois, right? So the only other option would have been, I guess, to like expel them all back to France or something, and that didn't want to do that. So then that was why the taxes got raised all of a sudden because they were like, well, we need to pay the expenses of the war, and part of those expenses were just buying off the French. Which, as a Canadian, let me tell you, there's been a whole lot of buying off the French in the last 100, 200 years.
Right.
And then the second bit was that the British decided to extend the borders of Quebec, like pretty much like they just like kind of hooked it up like Louisiana. So the entire like inland of the US was going to be Quebec territory and therefore not open to the colonists in the 13 colonies to move into and settle. So suddenly they were like all the Anglos are going to be hemmed in, kind of trapped, and this is all this land is going to be given to the French. So they like both of these created like massive grievances amongst the colonists who were like, hold on, like we wanted to go settle that, but and also why the hell are we paying charging us these taxes? Um, and then yeah, one thing sort of led to another over the next several years, and then war.
Right. Interesting,
Yeah.
kind of an American aside to the French and Indian War and the whole French and the Quebec War or whatever. Um, the French and Indian War is actually also the genesis of the American Cajun, right? And how those
Yes.
Cajuns ended up in Louisiana because most of these Cajuns were actually called Acadians, and they lived in
Hmm.
Acadia, which is present day Maine, and they were
And Nova
French.
Scotia.
Yeah, they're French settlers that allied with the Indians against the British. And when the British defeated the French and the Indians, they were able to basically kick out the Acadians out of frickin' Maine and go get the fuck out of here. And the
Yeah.
majority of them went down to New Orleans under which was the Louisiana territory of the French. So that's how you get these like
Hmm.
weird hillbillies from like the mountains of Maine in Louisiana.
And Nova Scotia
Yep,
also. There were a
right.
bunch of there as well.
That broke my
Wasn't
Interesting
brain a
much
stuff.
little.
We should
distinction.
learn more about. You
There
should
wasn't
teach.
Yeah.
there wasn't much distinction made between those territories at that point. When I was British controlled territories. But yeah, I mean like so in Canada as well, we don't learn about any of this, right? Like the French, like the 7 Years' War, French and Indian War. It's basically not really a part of the Canadian history curriculum. I think because they don't want to piss off the Quebecois by emphasizing the fact that this is how we conquered them. So we just kind of brushed over. So you have this like foundational war that actually should probably be the the foundational myth and could actually serve as a foundational myth war for both countries combined, which has been largely ignored, thus making it also completely unexplored territory from the point of view of entertainment media, which could maybe use something other than World War II to make movies about.
Right. Well, a big problem with the French and Indian War, the Seven-Year War, is that when you start reading into it and you kind of understand what's going on, it does contradict the American Revolutionary myth of, wanting
Mm,
freedom and the British being oppressive. I had this fortunate like luck of taking a a university level course for it was an American history or a revolutionary history course, and it was taught by a visiting professor from England, and he taught the American Revolution from a perspective of the British, and I thought it was very fascinating. I was like, okay, I got to take this class. I want to learn this. And one of the things that once you add the Seven-Year War into it, you realize that a lot of the taxes, right? So part of the American fantasy, the American mythology of, the Revolutionary War is that the Americans colonists were unjustly taxed, right? That they were
hmm.
unjustly taxed by the British. Well, if you look at the Seven-Year War, the British Empire spent a massive amount of tax treasure, taxing their own
Hmm.
population, their own British population living in England, to basically pay for the safety and the land that the American colonists lived. So the Americans weren't paying any
Yeah.
taxes. They weren't paying for the thousands and thousands of redcoat soldiers that were basically fought off the French and the Indians. And the British were getting broke, and they said, "Hey, man, we fought off the French and the Indians for you guys to protect you. We also, we also protect, the Hitherlands. We actually have like British soldiers born in England fighting and dying against Native Americans, to protect the colonies. And all this treasure, all this money comes from the British people, the people living in London or, whatever, right? And
Mhm.
can you contribute a little bit, maybe just a bit? And then the Americans said, hey, no, no, not at all. We're not paying for
Yeah,
that.
it was not like a little bit, right?
Right.
But like, I'm sorry, it was not a lot. I mean, it was a very, very little bit.
Very, very
But
little bit. Well, and
I
then
mean, to be fair to the Americans, like initially the American elites were not completely opposed to taxation. I mean, they understood like the logic of that. Right?
right,
They were not unreasonable people, but they were like, well, okay, if we are going to be, taxed like any other British citizen, then can we just send some representatives to Parliament? And that was sort of, and then like the British lords were utterly disinterested in allowing colonials to sit in Westminster. So like that.
right, that backfired. But for a certain degree, they didn't
Mm,
even actually want direct taxation. Right? They never even asked for direct taxation. What they wanted them basically is, okay, can you not sell your shit independently without us? Like they're like, if we protect you, you send your shit back to England and then we sell it. Not
mm.
you do direct trade with the Caribbean and the French. Can you not trade with the people we just fought a war to protect you from? You know what I mean? That was kind of like, hey guys, how about you not do that? So in a way, you can look at the British perspective and be like, okay, so we just sent all these guys. They died fighting the French and the Indians, and now these motherfuckers are not even contributing for the military, and they're going around and trading with the French in the Caribbean that we just fought, and we're actually currently in a war with right now. So they're like, hey, can you stop? I don't know, trading with the people that we're fighting in the Caribbean and in the Atlantic and all.
Suckers!
Right. So it's
Go America,
you
suckers!
look at the American Revolution from that
Get
perspective, and
cucked.
you're like, wait a second there. These guys were kind of assholes when you think about it. Right?
I mean,
I'm
I
thinking of all
mean,
my I'm thinking of all
most
my pilgrim ancestors back in Massachusetts going, yeah, fuck you guys, deal with it. Just kidding, just kidding.
It's interesting, like
I'm
like
sure they would not have used such robust language if they were
Well,
genuine pilgrims.
I don't know.
maybe in
Benjamin
my branch that
Franklin.
made it out to Ohio.
Benjamin Franklin wore his little
Yeah,
raccoon hat and was like a total whoremonger in Paris, So he's out there
yes.
slaying Parisian whores left and right and embarrassing everybody with his antics and stuff. He's straight up OG
Yeah,
gangster out
that
there.
man was not a Puritan by any stretch of the imagination.
I imagine
He's
the only
dead.
ones that are in the history books.
Yeah. I'd be surprised that if you look through his almanac, there's not some like powders that he invented for treating STDs and stuff, because that dude was probably out there, out there coming up with stuff,
He's got the whole section on like he's like okay, this is what we use for like to get keeping the member
the
excited,
French
shall we
itch
say?
off.
There's a fly. Yeah, well, yeah,
French
exactly.
itch.
There's a page for like fly agaric, and then there's a page for what to do the next day.
Yeah. They got how to treat the French itch. You're like, oh, I don't know, man. Like. Anyways, Mr. Carter, thank you for joining us. It was a wonderful conversation. Always wish we had more
Yeah, man.
time.
Thank you.
I definitely want you back. So
Yeah,
I know Hmm?
we should do that. We should do this again sometime, man. I had a
Absolutely,
awesome
man.
time.
That was
This was so
wonderful.
chill. This is one of the best podcast conversations I've had in quite some time.
Well, I'm glad.
Awesome,
I'm
dude.
glad. I'm glad that we deliver. We actually I get that from almost every guest. They're like, man, we love talking with you guys. And it's probably because I'm a schizophrenic and I have 7 cups of coffee while I'm talking, so I talk like a million words a minute. When I get excited. But I really like
I
discussing.
just let Alex do all the heavy lifting, so it's fine.
I just like talking about Benjamin Franklin and the French itch a lot, and it's just like I have a passion for the history of sexually transmitted infections. So Yeah, you understand that I'm an internal medicine connoisseur basically when it comes to historical STIs. Yeah, I definitely want you back.
Hey, National Foundation
Please,
myth.
please
There
keep
it is.
writing, dude. Keep writing, man. Your articles are every time I see
Yeah.
it. I think I've told you, in our little chat groups and stuff that I have friends in real life friends completely outside of like the schizoid online culture that walk up to me and are like, "Oh man, like you should check out this article by this dude named John Carter," and I'm like. Okay. I got a tool now, you know what I mean? And I have people.
You're like, yeah, I'm gonna group chat with that
Yeah, no,
guy.
and I've got people waiting for this episode to drop. That text me this morning. They're like, "You want to get John Carter on this week?" So yeah, man. So you're definitely your writing's really going out there and affecting a change. And I mean, every podcast I listen to, and I listen to a lot because I'm a terminally podcast brain individual. I feel like everybody's been mentioning you a lot more and more every single time. Like I just listened to a podcast this morning driving. I think it was Dave Green's last podcast, and he was talking about you and stuff, and it just
That's awesome.
on and on.
It's kind of scary too. No, apparently I got a shout out on Matt Walsh a few days ago.
That's
He
awesome.
he quoted directly the first like couple of paragraphs from my Canadian election postmortem. I was like, holy shit! Like,
That's cool.
Well,
You deserve it, man.
you know what? Alexander Dugan fucking shared our podcast. Okay.
that's wild. That's wild. That's cool.
Which one of us is going to end up in jail first? That's
Yeah,
that's
Yeah, I was
the
gonna
race
say,
here.
yeah.
That's the race here, guys. Let's go.
Yeah.
There's
And
just,
it's
like,
funny because
freaking
we're
DHS agents like listening into this, like making notes, like, oh, dude, guys.
yeah, you're like, oh, okay, these guys, they're okay with everybody as long as there's no crime, and they really like to talk about STDs in Japanese. I'm nothing there, dude. There's nothing there. Like, listen here, NSA agent that's listening to this. We love everybody. All right, we love everybody except. Anyways, so hopefully have you on soon again. I know you're traveling. You're living the life of a gentleman adventurer. So that's freaking fantastic. Keep writing. I mean, I don't read the Canadian articles because I don't think about you guys at all. But sometimes I do find them interesting. But
It's
definitely.
really it's always funny to me the levels of engagement different topics get. So if I write about like something like topical American politics, it's like massive engagement. And if I write like something about like Canadian politics, it's like half that amount of engagement. And then if I write like one of my like metaphysics, like philosophy, schizo posting things, it's like that's really hitting this. And then if I do like something
that's
like
where I'm in.
like
That's where I'm
scientifically
at.
related, it's like the engagement is like greater. So it's like
Right. Well, write about anime and that kind of stuff. And real quick, I actually wanted to mention something because I know you're kind of like into like gaming sometimes, and you do kind of cover some gaming. Did you guys see the new Grand Theft Auto trailer that they dropped like this morning or yesterday?
no,
No.
no.
So
Is it terrible?
so they pushed back the game by another year, right? And they
Yeah.
dropped a new trailer, and it looks actually quite fantastic, right? Graphics wise and stuff. But guess who the main character is now in Grand Theft Auto 6? A white
no.
blonde
It's a fat
Floridian
woman.
that lifts.
Wait,
Oh,
say
wait,
that one more
what?
time.
The main character of the new Grand Theft Auto is a white dude that lifts,
No.
is a hillbilly, like a Floridian hillbilly kind of guy, and he is bailing out. The trailer is him bailing out his Latina girlfriend out of jail. Could you make a more right-wing coded chud like thing? It's like white guy with a ripped up shirt, like no sleeves,
Yes.
lifting weights by
I'm
the
watching it
beach,
right now.
while Latino girls are like
Dating a
checking
Latina
it out.
girl. Yes.
It is
Right.
like I'm like, oh, did you
Oh my
remake the
God.
game completely from scratch, like in the last year? I was like,
That's amazing.
Whoa.
it blew my mind.
Yeah, this guy's a total Chad. Holy shit.
Yeah, he's driving like
We
a
are- we are
Trans Am or something like that. Or no, he's driving like a Ford
We are,
truck.
I've
we
seen
are
this guy at
experiencing a
Tractor
cultural
Supply.
shift.
I've seen this guy
We're
at Tractor
experiencing-
Supply.
No,
So,
there's a
in the next-
commentary.
I
There's
think-
an
I think in
article
the
there
next,
to be
like-
written.
in the
Holy
next
smokes.
year or two, I think like we're going to see this like hard shift, right?
Right.
Like where like the right wing aesthetics that have been sort of cultivated in our sort of underground thing for the last like 10, 15 years are it's gonna like break through. It's gonna get discovered essentially. And they're gonna mine the shit out of it, and modify it, and like, and initially we're gonna be like amazing, and
Well,
then
no.
it's just gonna end up like,
Right, right. Because look, when I think Rockstar released the trailer for it like a few, maybe 6 months ago, 7 months ago, and it was very like
mm-hmm,
feminized, very like, Latina girl power, and everybody's like, oh man, it's
mm-hmm.
gonna be like, it's gonna be a chick, it's gonna be like that, like there was such like a negative reaction to it. And this was before the election, right? That they released the original trailer.
Yeah.
And then they just announced that they're going to push it back a year, and they dropped this trailer, which is like a much more completed trailer. And my buddy at work was like, "Oh, did you see the new Grand Theft Auto trailer, dude? It's so realistic looking." And I was like, "I don't know, man. This is going to be like some woke shit. I don't know if I want to play it, right?" And he's like, "No, no, no, check it
Mm-hmm.
out, check it out, check it out." So I looked at it on my phone, and I was like, "Holy crap, dude!" It's like, did you just like suck Twitter like right wing Twitter brain like and throw it into a trailer? Because that's exactly what they did, and it's such an
I
interesting.
bet that's exactly what it. I mean, that's exactly what happened. Probably,
Yeah,
like I suspect that like at like the executive level in like Rockstar, like because like in the last several months, right? Like forget about the election. You've also had a few very high profile games like from like AAA studios come out and just crash and fucking burn,
right,
taking hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars with them. Um, and like that's a lot of money that these companies lost, right? So like I bet you like there's some people up high in Rockstar who were like looking at that shit, they're like, all right, okay, this tranny shit, it's not working out. Like people hate it. So okay, like everyone in the dev team who's like doing the tranny shit, fire them.
right,
Get them out. Okay, new writers. Get the new writers in. Okay, what are the kids actually like? Okay. So like all like the 16-year-old like like white boys who play these games, like, okay, they're all on like right wing Discord servers. All right, give them that.
right.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Throwing
Yeah.
a Latina waifu, and bam, dude, you got money right there.
Oh
And
hell
it's
yeah.
interesting because with the election, there was this critical vibe shift that you can't even deny happened, and because by
Mm-hmm.
by definition, the way films are made, movies are made, and stuff, it takes years to get from the day they start filming to through editing, through all the all the stuff. There's a lot of movies that came out this year or at the beginning of the right during the vibe shift, like in December and stuff, that like just bombed it because they felt like movies that were from a different era. They felt dated like
Yeah,
already,
they face planted right into it. Is
Right,
that you have this is one of the fun things to watch in the next couple of years
right,
is going to be because there's all this institutional inertia like everywhere in the culture, like in the movie studios, in the game studios, in academia, like in the corporate sector, and like you can't turn those things on a dime, right? And they built up some real momentum. But meanwhile, the culture has decided that it's done with this shit. It
right,
hates this shit, and it's going to punish the ever living fuck out of anyone caught doing this shit. So
right,
like they're tripping over themselves now, trying to like redirect. At the same time, like they got the internal momentum of their organizations, like all of the woke people they hired who were like religiously committed to like driving this thing off a cliff. They're desperately trying to like regain control and like avoid total financial catastrophe. It's going to be very funny to watch
right. Look, I tell you, man, go when you get a chance, go and watch that video. Like, watch the trailer because I want your opinion on it. It's such a like it like slapped
I'm
me
gonna
across
watch
the
this
face.
immediately after we
Yeah.
get
You know.
off because like this
Yeah.
sounds very entertaining.
All right,
Yeah.
man.
It's
Listeners at home, thank you for listening. Please like, share, and subscribe. We work real hard to get the best guests on here and have good conversations. This takes a lot of effort on our part. So, if you love what you're listening to, please, subscribe to the paid options because it helps us, pay for these microphones and editing software and everything. And we can buy cigarettes or whatever we buy with the money. And John, thank you for coming on. And you guys have a good night.